Chapter 16, 79. Zhang Xuanfeng's expression changed slightly as he looked at the man who was barely able to stand with the help of his long spear. He did not expect that he had delayed for so long, allowing this guy to finish what he was doing and leave. However, Zhang Xianfeng quickly calmed down because he could clearly see the state Xiaoyang was in. He was extremely weak, as if he was about to collapse. He looked like a flower rack, impressive but useless. If Xiaoyang was at his peak, Zhang Xianfeng would not dare to fight him head-on. He would even have to think about how to escape in order to save his own life. However, the situation was different now. How could he be a match for Zhang Xianfeng when he was so weak? It was obvious that Xiaoyang had paid a heavy price to save him. What was there to be afraid of when an extremely weak tiger was facing him? Zhang Xianfeng looked like he was out of breath. He did not look like a cultivator at all. He looked like an ordinary person. Thinking of this, Zhang Xianfeng calmed down a lot. At the same time, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had completely defeated the champion and toyed with the princess of the royal family. It was a joyous thing to think about. As for the cultivator lying on the ground, he did not need to worry about him at all since he looked half dead. "Yo, why do you look like you're looking at your lover? Or could it be that all of you have done too many improper things, and that's why the champion of our competition this time is so exhausted?" Zhang Xianfeng continued speaking in a playful manner, and his obscene appearance was even more unbearable to look at. Shan Fian immediately noticed that something was wrong with Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang was like the sun in the sky previously. Now he was like a fish that had been thrown onto the shore and was about to die of thirst. At that moment, the hope in the woman's eyes seemed to have been extinguished in an instant. What replaced it was endless despair. Xiaoyang coughed a few times and spat out a mouthful of blood. He looked like he was about to collapse. Now Xiaoyang was indeed like that. His vision kept turning black. Fortunately, the medicinal power of the pill had already melted. As long as he slightly nourished his divine sense and recovered some spiritual qi, it would be enough to deal with the black-robed man. "You adulterers really know how to play. You're actually doing such immoral things in the tombs of our God Realm's ancestors." Zhang Xianfeng laughed loudly. Currently, Zhang Xianfeng felt that the outcome was already decided, so he had nothing to worry about. In fact, he even wanted to play a little longer to satisfy his inexplicable sense of superiority and satisfy his perverted mentality. If it weren't for the two battles with Ji Fei and the monster condensed from death energy, why would Xiaoyang be like this? Zhang Xianfeng did not even dare to breathe loudly. "Even if my life is on the line, it's enough to deal with you," Xiaoyang said in a low voice. Now, Xiaoyang's voice was also very soft, which showed how weak he was. "Listen, this weak voice, it's obvious that you've overindulged. I can't believe that the champion of this year's grand competition is actually a silver spear with a wax head. Nice to look at, but useless," Zhang Xianfeng said as his laughter became even more carefree. Such filthy words were unbearable to the ear, and Shan Fian was also furious. If it was possible, she would have chopped Zhang Xianfeng into pieces, but she did not have the ability to do so. Could it be that his trip to the tomb of the god of sin had come to an end? The more she thought about it, the angrier Shan Fian became. This wasn't the result she wanted. However, the reality was so cruel. "Your suggestion is not bad. It's a pity that I didn't turn Zhang Xuani into a eunuch. I believe that you spent a lot of heavenly treasures to save his life," Xiaoyang said with a cold smile. He knew about the black-robed man's life from Shan Fian, so he could deduce the relationship between the black-robed man and Zhang Xuani. "Shut up." When Zhang Xianfeng heard this, he was instantly furious. Originally, his younger brother's team was not weak, and they could have entered the divine tomb to cultivate. However, Xiaoyang had destroyed him personally, and even made him unable to cultivate for 10 years. This made him extremely resentful. Xiaoyang sneered as if he did not hear what Zhang Xianfeng said. However, your brother is quite lucky. After all, there were restrictions in place, so he was able to keep his life. You might not even have a soul in the end." Zhang Xianfeng said this casually because of Xiao Yang's condition. When Zhang Xianfeng heard this, he shouted angrily. He looked extremely angry, and his murderous intent was not concealed at all. His good mood was completely ruined by Xiao Yang's words, and he lost all interest. "Fine. Since you're so eager to die, I'll grant you your wish. I'll fulfill your wish then." Zhang Xianfeng gritted his teeth as he spoke. "You're already so weak. What right do you have to provoke me? No, I won't let you die so easily. I'll cut off your flesh bit by bit, and let you see how I'll eat your flesh and torture you slowly," Zhang Xianfeng said through gritted teeth, and his anger was slightly suppressed. When Shen Fian felt the strong battle intent, she immediately prepared to attack again. Since Xiao Yang's condition was extremely bad, she had to make a move. If she gave it her all, there was still a chance for her to survive. "Trust me," Xiao Yang said calmly as he raised his spear. He was talking nonsense just now, so that he could recover more of his strength. Although he had not recovered much, he could still give it a try. Suddenly, the murderous intent was released without any concealment. Since Zhang Xianfeng wanted to kill him, Xiao Yang would naturally not show mercy to his enemy. This guy could be so ruthless to a member of the royal family. Naturally, he would not show mercy to an outsider like Zhang Xianfeng. Therefore, there was no need for Zhang Xianfeng to show mercy. Shen Fian stood there and did not move. She felt that it was impossible. However, in her heart, she trusted Xiao Yang completely. She felt that as long as this man was here, she wouldn't have to worry so much. She only needed to watch from the side and not cause trouble. At this moment, Zhang Xuani also shuddered. The intense murderous intent made him feel a little scared. However, that fear was quickly swept away. It was just a sick tiger. What was there to be afraid of? Chapter 1680. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Xianfeng calmed himself down. He felt that he didn't need to think too much. His opponent's killing intent was indeed strong. It was a level higher than his. However, Zhongjiu was just a weak tiger. What was there to be afraid of? Since he was afraid of the strong, why couldn't he bully the weak? No matter how arrogant Xiaoyang was, he couldn't change the current situation. Therefore, he didn't have much to be afraid of. All he needed to do was to disperse Zhongjiu's last breath. At that time, he could trample on Zhongjiu in any way he wanted. He could trample on Zhongjiu arrogantly and toy with Zhongjiu. How wonderful would that be? In the next moment, Zhang Xianfeng did not hesitate at all. He roared angrily and his aura rose. At the same time, he rushed towards his opponent like a meteor. There was no hesitation at all. There was only an indomitable, killing intent. Shen Fian's heart tightened when she saw the black-robed man charging toward Xiaoyang. She was in a dilemma again. She didn't know whether she should help or not. Although she trusted Xiaoyang a lot, the current situation wasn't optimistic at all. Xiaoyang also used his actions to tell Shen Fian that there was no need for her to interfere. The white-robed man held the silver lightning spear in his hand. Without hesitation, he charged towards the black-robed man. At the tip of the spear, the power of lightning wasn't concealed at all. It burst out like a sudden clap of thunder. The incomparably sharp hostility was displayed vividly. It was as if it was invincible, although Zhang Xianfeng said that he didn't dare to be careless. A weak tiger was still a tiger. Moreover, Xiaoyang was a genius who fought his way to the top. Compared to Shen Fian, who was spoiled since childhood, they were worlds apart. Therefore, Xiaoyang relied on his own efforts to become the champion of the realm of God's grand competition. He was just an outsider who was born in a small place. Therefore, if he wasn't powerful, how could he reach this stage? Moreover, he had also been present during the battle between Xiaoyang and Shenluo, so he had witnessed Xiao Yang's strength. Boom! Zhang Xianfeng did not dodge at all. He directly punched the tip of the silver lightning spear, which was unreasonable and overbearing. Of course, the main reason he did this was to test how much of Xiao Yang's strength he still had. This way, he would be able to have an estimate in his heart. Therefore, this punch was just a test. It was simple and clear. However, under the power of the fist, there was no mercy. In an instant, the lightning was shattered by the fist, and a huge rebounding force was unleashed. Xiao Yang's body was immediately flung back like a kite with a broken string. This was a great opportunity, but Zhang Xianfeng did not follow up with another attack. Instead, he took the opportunity to take a breath, and the smile on his face became even wider. As expected, Zhang Xianfeng was indeed a sick tiger. Even though he had a divine-grade celestial weapon, he was unable to unleash its full power. Zhang Xianfeng could not even block a punch with 70% of his strength. This was enough to explain a lot of problems. This was really a heaven-sent opportunity. It gave him such a great opportunity to take revenge. It seemed that even the heavens were on his side. This could only be said to be satisfying. It was really comfortable. When some people were happy, some people were sad. When Xinfian saw this, she immediately gasped. Xiao Yang was already so weak. Could he really continue fighting? With a thought, the sword in Xinfian's hand glowed with sword radiance again. Since her companion was already so weak, she naturally could not continue to stand by and do nothing. Sometimes she was conflicted because she did not know the situation. Now that the situation was clear, there was no need for her to hesitate anymore. It could be said that she and Xiao Yang shared the same honor and disgrace. Other than joining forces to defeat Zhang Xianfeng, there was no other way. Even though the chances were very slim, they still had to try. Who knew they might succeed? That's all you got. You can't even block a punch for me. What right do you have to compete with me? Zhang Xianfeng scolded angrily. He was in an exceptionally good mood. Originally, he thought that Xiao Yang had some trump card, which was why he was so confident. Now, it seemed that Zhang Xianfeng was just bluffing to scare him off. Fortunately, he did not fall for it. Otherwise, it would really be too late for regrets. Xiao Yang got up at this time. He coughed twice and said, "Go and take care of Jifei. I can deal with this scum." The white-robed man's voice was still very weak, but it was very stable. It was very reassuring. Xinfian's fighting spirit, which had already gathered, slowed down again. She asked, "Are you okay?" These words were said with great hesitation, because even an idiot could see that Xiao Yang's current state was as bad as it could get. It was impossible for him to take on the opponent's attack by himself. Then, it was impossible for him to defeat the opponent. It was undoubtedly a fool's dream. If you don't believe me, you can run away now. I can hold him back for a while. Xiao Yang said impatiently. Hearing that, Xinfian closed her mouth and went to the top of the mountain to check on Jifei. Of course, Xiao Yang's suggestion was not bad. She could still make it if she ran away now. However, after going through so much together, was it appropriate for her to betray her companion now? If Xinfian was such a person, she would have gone to comprehend the opportunity instead of sitting here for so long. Although Xinfian was arrogant and spoiled since she was young, her nature was not bad. She knew what was right and wrong. This is really touching. I didn't expect that in such a short period of time, you have already established such a deep friendship. It's really enviable. Zhang Xianfeng sighed with emotion and put on an act. It could be said that he displayed his lowliness incisively and vividly. However, seeing that Xinfian did not run away, the black-robed man was very happy. This idiot really wanted to go through thick and thin with him, but this was also good. When the time came, he would be able to prevent himself from making mistakes and causing endless trouble. Don't worry, a gentleman will help you. When the time comes, I'll bury you together. Zhang Xianfeng sneered. Chapter 1681. Xiao Yang was barely floating in the air. After being hit, The blood in his body was churning again. However, it did not matter because he could still hold on. Moreover, he would only become stronger as the effects of the medicine spread out. It was not a bad idea to make a small fuss now. You guys are really touching. When the time comes, I'll definitely fulfill your wishes. You have her bones in your body and her flesh in your stomach. TSK, it'll be wonderful. I'm really a good person. Zhang Xianfeng said with an intoxicated look on his face. It was as if he had done something great and was proud of himself. Zhang Xianfeng felt extremely happy when he thought of that scene. When he did this, he had to leave them with a single breath so that they could accept his great kindness and thank him when the time came. Xin Fian almost vomited when she heard those disgusting words. However, she did not refute them. It was meaningless to argue now. After all, without strength, it was meaningless to say anything. On the other hand, Xiao Yang's face did not change other than turning pale. Of course, even if there was, it would not be obvious. Xiao Yang was disgusted by this perverted opponent. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He could only blame it on his bad luck. However, he would not go easy on him this time. When dealing with such an enemy, he could only let him suffer. You can still stand up? Why, you can't even speak now. Won't you have more strength if you spend less time on her stomach? Zhang Xianfeng said with a smile. At this moment, Xin Fian was disgusted once again. This Zhang Xianfeng was truly a beast with a human face. In the realm of the gods, this guy had a good reputation. He had always been a gentleman. However, when he came here, he was like a wild dog, barking and biting people. No matter what kind of filthy words came out of his mouth, it was disgusting. Since you can't speak, I'll help you. Zhang Xianfeng said with a smile. His face was filled with an expression that said, "Come and hit me." In the next moment, Zhang Xianfeng made his move again. He was as swift as the wind as he threw out another punch. 7 steps of the barbarian god. Xiao Yang let out a low shout and chose to temporarily avoid the attack. He stepped out and dodged the punch, but the consumption was not small. There was a very brief moment of dizziness. However, it was much better than before. The black-robed man's punch missed, and he was a little angry. He didn't expect this guy to be like a loach. He was really hard to deal with. Let's see where you can run to. Zhang Xianfeng shouted angrily. He immediately turned around and continued to attack the weakened man. The speed of this punch was even faster and more powerful than before. When Xiao Yang took his second step, he was hit by the wind from the punch. His body staggered, and he only managed to stabilize himself after taking a few steps forward. However, at this moment, Zhang Xianfeng continued to rush over without any hesitation. His speed was even faster. Under this punch, the power was so strong that even the space cracked. The aftershock was like a wave, pushing people along with it. Fortunately, Xiao Yang's long spear was extraordinary, so he could barely block the power. If he was not careful, he would lose control of himself. At this moment, Xiao Yang's eyes turned cold. He took his third step and was very determined. In the next moment, the long spear was like a big knife slashing down. The power of thunder was even more obvious at this moment. It was as if he was going all out, and success or failure depended on this thought. Suddenly, the black-robed man also felt a huge force coming from his back. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Countless rays of light bloomed from his back. There were many colors, and it was very dazzling. It was impossible to determine the power of this spear. However, it was after all a sage-level magic treasure. He could not let his guard down. Therefore, Zhang Xianfeng immediately activated all his protective magic treasures to prevent any mistakes from being careless. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. Boom! Suddenly, some of the lights dimmed, and the sound of some magic treasures being broken could be heard. A huge force burst out, and Zhang Xuanfeng's entire body was pushed forward. Of course, he did it on purpose. It could be considered as pushing the boat with the current. Only in this way could he avoid all the power of this spear. This was a great opportunity. However, Xiao Yang's breath was almost used up by this spear. Therefore, he had to take a breath and could not continue to attack. Therefore, he missed a great opportunity. Not being in a good state would affect his performance. When Xin Fian, who was watching the battle from the side, saw this scene, she calmed down a lot. That person did not lie to her. Even if she was extremely weak, she could still take care of these small fries. So what if you're on the hidden dragon roll? So what if you're at the top? In front of this chief, it was still somewhat insignificant. After feeling the burning pain on his back, Zhang Xianfeng gritted his teeth. He was actually injured. Although it was only a flesh wound, it was still a humiliation. To be caught by a tiger that was so weak that it was about to die, this was simply a joke. What a pity. This must be your trump card. I only broke a few magic treasures and suffered some flesh wounds. You can only wait for your death. Zhang Xianfeng calmed himself down and sneered. Xiao Yang was indifferent. He only took deep breaths and quickly adjusted the power in his body. Looking at Xiao Yang's exhausted appearance, Zhang Xianfeng was sure that Xiao Yang was now an arrow at the end of its flight. Therefore, since he did not succeed, he would not be able to cause any trouble in the future. However, he did not dare to underestimate him. After all, Xiao Yang was able to shoot that spear. He might have other tricks up his sleeves. After suffering a loss once, he would definitely not suffer a loss a second time. Otherwise, he would have to pay the price for his arrogance. Zhang Xianfeng was very clear about this. He had once defeated people who were stronger than him by pretending to be weak. Therefore, he absolutely could not do such a foolish thing. He had held on for too long, and it was incomparably annoying. In that case, he would have to be forcefully interrupted. White Tigers, 7 Murders. Chapter 1682. Even a lion would go all out when hunting a rabbit, especially when facing someone who was more powerful than itself. If one was lucky and even had a playful mentality, it would be easy for some unwarranted incidents to happen. In fact, one might even have to pay a heavy price for it. Therefore, no matter what, one could not be careless. Otherwise, one would have to pay a heavy price. The black-robed young man had already paid a heavy price because he had underestimated his opponent. Therefore, he quickly put away his playful mentality and did not dare to act recklessly anymore. After all, he was facing an opponent who was much stronger than him. Even if he was already extremely weak, who could guarantee that he would not prepare a huge killing move to take his life in the next moment? Therefore, after a painful lesson, Zhang Xianfeng decided not to drag it on any longer. He would first destroy his opponent's last breath. By then, it would depend on his mood to play with his opponent. Even if there was a 1 in a million risk, he had to completely destroy his opponent. Otherwise, he would most likely have to pay a heavy price for it. In an instant, a tyrannical fist intent exploded from Zhang Xuanfeng's body. The space around him shattered, and his black robe fluttered seamlessly. It was as if he was invincible. The immense pressure caused Xiao Yang to frown subconsciously. It seemed like his opponent was not going to give him a chance to recuperate. Therefore, the difficulty he faced now had increased by a few notches. Zhang Xianfeng was not a greenhorn. He had seen many storms and waves, so he knew how difficult it was. That was why he was so determined at this moment. In an instant, he threw out a punch. The whistling sound was as deafening as a ferocious tiger's roar. Instantly, the fist intent transformed into 7 white tigers. They roared continuously, opened their bloody mouths, and pounced on their target with their fangs bared and claws bared. After throwing out the punch, Zhang Xianfeng quickly took a breath. At the same time, a playful smile appeared on his face. He wanted to see how Xiao Yang, who was already at the end of his rope, would block his attack. However, Xiao Yang didn't panic or fear at all. He shook his spirit and waved the long spear in his hand. The thunder burst out like a dragon's roar. It was very strong. Countless thunderbolts poured out without mercy. They were like a surging river, surging with waves. At the same time, those thunderbolts were also constantly intertwining, as if they wanted to form a huge net to capture and kill all 7 white tigers. It was extremely tyrannical. However, the 7 white tigers arrived in the blink of an eye. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws, tearing a hole in the electric net. With the white tiger's rampage, the speed at which the electric net disintegrated was also very fast. It was as if it was a net woven from ordinary hemp rope. Under the sharp claws of a ferocious tiger, it could not withstand a single blow and was easily torn apart. It could be said that it did not use the slightest bit of strength and appeared to be very relaxed. Of course, it was not without any effect. The power of the white tiger gradually weakened under the consumption of the power of the thunderbolts. However, this little weakening was not enough to affect the lethality of the white tiger's attacks. However, Xiaoyang did not give up. The long spear in his hand continued to burst out thunderbolts, doing his best to block the attack of the 7 white tigers. The smile on Zhang Xuanfeng's face grew wider as he watched from the side. He knew that Xiaoyang did not have much strength now. He was relying on the power of the sacred grade magic treasure to resist. Otherwise, how could he be in such a state? No matter how strong Xiaoyang was, now that he had exhausted all his strength, no matter how powerful his techniques were, he could not cook a meal without rice. Therefore, even if his spear skills were out of the ordinary, it was still useless. There was no way to change the situation in front of him. He could only passively take a beating. Xin Fian's heart tightened as she watched. The situation was very tragic now. Xiaoyang was almost unable to resist, but he did not take half a step back. He seemed to be fearless. Suddenly, Xiaoyang let out a loud shout and raised his silver lightning spear. He didn't continue his defensive posture. Seeing this, he muttered in his heart. Could it be that Xiaoyang was ready to give up? Thinking of this, Zhang Xianfeng laughed in his heart. You are already a lamp without oil. There is no way you can continue to fight with me. This way, I can save a lot of energy. Thinking of how he was about to kill the champion of the realm of the gods and take revenge, he could no longer suppress the joy in his heart. He laughed uncontrollably. You are just a bumpkin from a remote mountain area. What right do you have to compare yourself with the cultivators of the realm of the gods? You even stepped on the heads of all the geniuses of the realm of the gods. What right do you have? At this moment, Xin Fian also soared into the sky. The sword in her hand emitted a sword light. It was very sharp. She knew that Xiaoyang could not hold on any longer. She had to make a move. No matter if she succeeded or not, she had to give it a try. If he did not even have the heart to resist, he might as well just wait for his death. Xin Fian was obviously not such a person. It was just a fight to the death. What was there to be afraid of? Even if Xiaoyang had given up, she would definitely not do so. Suddenly, Zhang Xianfeng also felt the change on this side. He sneered in disdain and said, Xin Fian, save it. With your skills, do you think that you can take advantage of my weakness when my attention is on Xiaoyang? Xin Fian did not say anything. The anger between her eyebrows rose. She raised the sword in her hand and gathered all the energy in her body. No matter what, she had to make this move. If she did not even dare to make a move, what was the point of it? She felt that she had to let Xiaoyang know that even in such a desperate situation, she would not take a step back. Compared to him, she was not inferior. She, a woman, had not given up. What reason did he have to give up on the hope of survival? Although it was a very unwise choice to place all her hopes on one person, reality was cruel. However, reality was cruel. She could only believe in that outsider, the person who saved her life. Kill! Xin Fian shouted. She gathered all her energy and slashed her sword down at this moment. She had no other thoughts. She only had an endless desire to live. Chapter 1683. At this time, the extremely weak man also clenched his teeth and gathered all the power in his body, concentrating it all on his arm. The silver spear, no longer had the slightest bit of lightning energy. All of it had been retracted, leaving only its sharpness and indomitable aura. The sword slashed down at this moment. Suddenly, a huge sword descended from the sky, turning into an incomparably huge sword. It fell with a bang, shining with extraordinary sword light. It was as if this sword could cause the mountains to collapse and the earth to crack. Even the earth would be directly cut in half. The black-robed man, floating in the air, did not change his expression. He even looked a little disdainful. He raised his head and looked at the sword essence. For a moment, he could not help but sneer. "Is this all you've got? A full-force attack is nothing more than this." With that, Zhang Xuanfeng's sleeves fluttered wildly. He raised his hands, and a vast amount of spiritual energy gushed out like a lake. It was mellow and calm. As the sword essence slashed down, Zhang Xuanfeng's body fell rapidly. He stepped 3 inches into the ground before he could stabilize his body and stop falling. However, the sword essence seemed to have stopped. Even though it was falling with all its might, it could not advance any further. On the contrary, the sword essence began to disappear under the erosion of the lake's spiritual energy. It was no longer as imposing as before. However, it was still not to be underestimated. Bursts of energy continued to erupt. After Xin Fian slashed down with the sword, she fell limply to the ground. It could be said that this sword had used up all the energy in her body. This was all she could do. After all, she was King Wu's rank 8 existence. The power of this full-force sword was naturally not to be underestimated. What's more, he had bet his entire fortune on this sword. If he failed, he could only wait helplessly for death. However, Shen Fian felt that it was worth it to do so. Who knows, maybe she could buy enough time for Xiaoyang. Even if it was only a 1 in a million chance, she had to try. If she did not have any hope at all, she naturally could not succeed. But after trying, he could only do his best and leave the rest to fate. At this time, Xiaoyang had also finished gathering his qi, and the silver lightning spear in his hand was thrown out. In the eyes of many almighties, such a primitive attack method was not enough to reach the apex. As long as one was slightly careful, they would be able to dodge it. There was no lethality to speak of at all. Of course, that was only true when it came to ordinary magic tools. However, the silver lightning spear was a saint-grade magic treasure. Furthermore, it had the support of the silent thunder bead. No matter what, its power could not be ignored. The silver spear drew an extremely beautiful arc in the air. The lightning that had been accumulating power for a long time also erupted a little at this moment, but it was still very weak. However, it looked very beautiful. It was like a meteor streaking across the dark night sky. It was a ray of light, a light that people looked forward to. Suddenly, Zhang Xianfeng also felt a chill in his heart. He looked up and saw a long spear with the power of lightning rushing towards him. But now, he was completely restrained by Shen Fian's sword. There was no way for him to escape or resist this spear. He did not expect that Xiaoyang, who was about to dissipate, would actually gather the remaining qi and throw out this spear. It could be said that he was staking everything on this spear. Could it be that this fellow was really a lunatic? In an instant, Zhang Xuanfeng's body also emitted a lot of light. Countless protective magic tools also surged out at this moment. He did not dare to underestimate the attack of a saint-grade magic tool. Even though he knew that the magic tools he had accumulated over the years would be shattered, and his heart ached, he did not dare to take the risk. Wherever the long spear passed, lightning would explode. The mysterious light would shatter in an instant, and countless magic tools directly exploded. They could not withstand the power of this spear at all. Qi! The long spear pierced into Zhang Xuanfeng's chest. Suddenly, a violent and accumulated lightning power crazily exploded. Suddenly, Zhang Xianfeng was forced to take a few steps back. The qi in his body was tumbling. The lake that was condensed by a mysterious method in his hand also shook at this moment. It was only a slight opportunity for the sword chi to slash down and directly cut into his body. Boom! The power on the spear continued to explode. At the same time, it was still moving forward. Finally, it pierced into the yellow soil and disappeared. The sword chi and the lightning power continued to wreak havoc in Zhang Xuanfeng's body, destroying his incomparably strong vitality. It was extremely violent and merciless. After throwing out that spear, Xiaoyang also fell to the ground. The last trace of energy in his body was almost exhausted. Originally, he wanted to use the Sky Qin Mountain to suppress it. Fortunately, Shen Fian's sword replaced the Sky Qin Mountain. Otherwise, Xiaoyang would really be powerless. As the saying goes, there is a limit to a person's strength. Sometimes, the sword that the other party threw out was like charcoal in the snow. It would instead determine the outcome of the battle. As for the outcome of the battle, Xiaoyang did not look at it. He only crazily urged the medicinal power of the elixir in his body to replenish his strength. He did not know if Zhang Xianfeng still had any tricks up his sleeves. Therefore, he had to be more cautious. He had to stand up as soon as possible and have the ability to continue fighting. Shen Fian, who was at the top of the mountain, had already lost all hope. However, when she heard the rumbling sound, she knew that her actions were meaningful. Even if she had exhausted all the energy in her body, what could she do? That man could make her feel incomparably at ease. Therefore, everything she did was worth it, even if it was inevitable that she would end up in a miserable situation. So what? At the very least, she had a clear conscience in her heart. She had already done her best. She did not surrender without a fight. At this moment, the arrogance in her heart also surged. This feeling was extremely comfortable. For a moment, the world seemed to have become incomparably quiet. Everything seemed to have come to an end. They had all done their best. As for success or failure, they could only do their best and leave it to fate. Looking at the gloomy death chi that was slowly approaching, Shen Fian felt a little uncomfortable. She still could not escape. Chapter 1684. At this moment, the world was extremely quiet. It was as if not a single sound could be heard. It was so quiet that one could even hear a pin drop. That black-robed man, who originally looked very confident and at ease, was now in a sorry state. His originally leisurely and carefree mood had now turned into disbelief, appearing somewhat sluggish. The black-robed man's hair was now disheveled, and there were many sword wounds on his body caused by the sword chi. Even his originally handsome face was now badly mutilated. He looked extremely ferocious and was no longer as calm as before. Of course, the most serious injury was his chest. There was a huge hole, and countless cracks had spread to every part of his body. Such injuries were too horrible to look at. If an ordinary person suffered such injuries, he would have died immediately. It was impossible for him to still be standing there. However, Zhang Xianfeng was a powerful rank 8 Kingwu. His body was full of vitality. As long as there was a thread of vitality left, he could regrow his flesh and bones. Although it would take some time, it would not cause him to die immediately. What was worse was that the spiritual energy in his meridians seemed to have lost its restraints and was constantly rampaging. It was extremely tragic, like a wild horse that had escaped its reins. It was difficult to control it. It could be said that it was extremely painful. Ah! The black-robed man howled in anger. However, in the next moment, he lowered his head and coughed nonstop. Pieces of flesh, mixed with blood, were constantly spat out. It was originally a battle that he was sure to win, but now he had ended up in such a miserable state. This made Zhang Xianfeng feel extremely regretful. If he had directly killed Shen Fian, there would not have been that sword strike, and the subsequent events would not have happened. However, regret was meaningless. What had happened was already a foregone conclusion. It would not change the slightest because of one person's regret. Suddenly, the black-robed man frowned. His trembling hands quickly began to form seals. He felt that he hadn't lost yet. If he didn't do anything, then he would really lose. Not long after, Zhang Xianfeng stabilized his qi and covered the hole in his chest with his palm. His flesh and blood began to regenerate rapidly. The hole in his chest started to recover at an extremely fast speed. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the hole had completely recovered. But the black-robed youth's face was still incomparably pale. Such heavy injuries could only be healed on the surface, but the internal injuries could only be slowly healed. Haha, even if the two of you work together to execute a very beautiful joint attack. So what? I'm not dead. Zhang Xianfeng laughed maniacally. Now he had finally tasted what it meant to fight with all his might in a desperate situation. It was indeed very powerful. If it wasn't for Xiao Yang's extraordinarily weak state, he might have really lost his life here. However, the heavens still cared for him and gave him such good luck. He didn't fall down immediately. This was something that was worth being happy about. Xinfian could only sigh helplessly when she heard the arrogant voice. They had already done their best, but it was still difficult to change the current situation. It was only a pity. However, there wasn't the slightest fear in her heart. She had already done what she could, but Zhang Xianfeng was simply too strong. Therefore, it was difficult to change the situation. You don't even have the strength to stand up now, right? You want to stake everything on one throw to kill me? Haha, you're too naive. Zhang Xianfeng laughed. Now he seemed to be a little deranged, perhaps because he had been provoked. It was as if everything that had happened had made him very unhappy. After fermenting his perverted mentality, it had become even more perverted. Xiao Yang lay on the ground motionlessly. He was trying his best to refine the medicinal power to fill the gap in his strength. It could be said that the worst-case scenario had already happened, but there was nothing he could do about it. Fortunately, he had already calculated this step, so he only needed to recover a little more strength to change everything. Now, Xiao Yang's condition could be said to be very bad. After throwing the silver lightning spear, he was attacked by the white tiger, Seven Murderous. Now, the aura in his body was extremely chaotic. Fortunately, Zhang Xuanfeng's condition wasn't very good either. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was on the verge of collapse. However, the black-robed man moved again. He took a step forward and walked towards the white-robed man on the ground. Every step Zhang Xianfeng took was very heavy. His internal injuries were very serious, and he had to carefully suppress them. Otherwise, once they exploded, he would probably fall to the ground directly. It could be said that he was holding on with one breath. Once he relaxed or lost this breath, he would fall to the ground like a defeated army, and it would be difficult for him to stand up again. This was also a battle of temperament, so he couldn't relax at all. The higher the level of a cultivator, the more important the last breath was in a battle. Even if he was about to be annihilated, he couldn't relax. Once he relaxed, it would be difficult for him to stand up again. With every step, Zhang Xuanfeng's body would constantly tremble. It looked like it was very strenuous for him, as if he was about to fall. He was on the verge of collapse. However, he wouldn't fall because what he wanted to do hadn't been completed yet. How could he do that? In this battle of life and death, he originally had the upper hand. He didn't want to fall just like that. If that happened, he would really be finished. Hearing the heavy footsteps getting closer and closer, Xiao Yang's chest tightened again. The moment of life and death was about to arrive, so he naturally wouldn't relax at all. Moreover, all he was thinking about was how to kill the enemy. Xinfian had already closed her eyes, as if she was waiting for the arrival of death. She was completely disheartened. However, there was still a glimmer of hope in her heart. Who knew what would happen? Although the hope was as unrealistic as a candle in the wind, it made her believe that she could hold on. At this moment, Zhang Xianfeng also walked to the front of Xiao Yang. When he saw the stubborn outsider, the smile on his face deepened. Chapter 1685. The black-robed young man looked at his opponent, his enemy, who he wanted nothing more than to grind to dust. His heart was filled with hatred. At the same time, a sense of satisfaction began to grow in him. The unparalleled champion of the Outer Realm was now lying on the ground like a dead man, unable to move at all. He could only wait for his death. Zhang Xianfeng, on the other hand, had never been a top-notch existence. However, today he could trample on this person. No matter how he thought about it, this was something that made him feel very satisfied. Today he could trample on Xiaoyang. Who knows? He might be able to trample on Shenwu tomorrow. If that was the case, how wonderful would this feel? No, as long as he could trample on Xiaoyang, Shenwu would naturally be under his feet. Therefore, in this way, he would be the strongest among King Wu's rank 8. All this while Zhang Xianfeng only felt that whether it was Shenwu or Xiaoyang, they only had good techniques and sage-grade magic treasures. That was why they could suppress him. Without these, how could they be a match for him? At that time, this champion's magic treasures would become his. Just thinking about it made him happy. Furthermore, the prize for this grand competition was a saint-level middle-level weapon. Looking at it this way, his harvest was really plentiful. Thinking of this, Zhang Xianfeng directly stepped on Xiaoyang's chest. Instantly, the wonderful feeling in his heart made him feel like he was floating. So what if you're strong? Now, you're still under my feet. You so-called geniuses, in my eyes, are not worth mentioning at all. Moreover, your lives are already in my hands. Xiaoyang was being stepped on, but he remained unmoved. However, his expression turned a little ugly. This was because the aura that he had painstakingly gathered was scattered. Therefore, he had to do it again. Continue to be strong. Aren't you invincible? Aren't you the leader of all the geniuses in the divine world? Zhang Xuanfeng's face became more and more excited as he spoke. Zhang Xianfeng continued to stomp on Xiaoyang as he spoke. He felt that it was wonderful to trample on Xiaoyang like this. This feeling was simply too comfortable. What? Say something. Or are you saying that you can't do it at all? Zhang Xianfeng laughed wildly. Although there were many twists and turns and accidents in this battle, the result did not change at all. Then this was a great thing, and it made people feel very happy. Xinfian, who was lying on the ground, was furious when she heard this. She took a deep breath and stood up. However, she had no spiritual energy left in her body. Seeing Xiaoyang being humiliated, there was nothing she could do. As long as you admit that you're trash and obediently lick my shoes clean, I'll give you a quick death. Otherwise, I'll let you know what pain is. Otherwise, I'll slowly peel off your skin and pull out your tendons so that you'll beg for death. Zhang Xianfeng said crazily. His eyes were filled with fanaticism. The current Zhang Xianfeng, driven by a strong sense of vanity, had undergone a great change. He had become extremely irrational and was immersed in this perverted happiness. You're just trash who uses tricks. I think you're even more stupid than Zhang Xuani. Xiaoyang, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke. Xiaoyang couldn't help but laugh when he saw the smug look on the little guy's face. Zhang Xianfeng was furious when he heard this. He shouted angrily, "Who's the one being stepped on now? Do you have any self-awareness? In my eyes, you're just trash. What right do you have to spout nonsense here?" Xiaoyang said coldly. When Zhang Xianfeng saw that his opponent did not show any expression of pain or regret, he felt a huge difference in his heart. How could this happen? He could not accept it. This was different from what he had expected. Is that so? Zhang Xianfeng said. He had completely fallen into madness. This guy who doesn't know what's good for him is still so stubborn. He's really not afraid of death. Since that's the case, I'll fulfill his wish and torture him properly. At this time, Zhang Xianfeng raised his foot again and was about to step on Zhang Xianfeng. However, the moment he raised his foot, he felt a chill in his heart. He also felt an extremely hot aura. Zhang Xuanfeng's eyes widened in disbelief. There was still a change in the situation. All of a sudden, Zhang Xianfeng remembered that Xiaoyang had never taken out a mid-grade saint-level weapon to fight. What was the reason behind this? The long sword with lightning on one side and flames on the other suddenly appeared in front of Zhang Xuanfeng's chest. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped. Zhang Xianfeng looked at the flying sword and was shocked. He had forgotten about this. Perhaps he thought that Xiaoyang was no longer able to control the middle sacred grade weapon, so he did not give him so many. However, the current situation clearly told him that he would have to pay a heavy price for this. In the next moment, the divine sword directly pierced Zhang Xuani's chest and sent him flying. Seeing this, Xin Fian's lips curled into a smile. Everything was finally coming to an end. That vile Zhang Xianfeng, it was time for him to eat the bitter fruit that he had planted. Boom! The Thunderfire Divine sword nailed Zhang Xianfeng to the top of a mountain. Zhang Xianfeng was still breathing. He was hanging there and his mind was not clear. It was hard for him to imagine what kind of monster Xiaoyang was. Even now, he still had the ability to use such a powerful technique. Could it be that his strength was limitless? Immediately, the power of lightning and flames exploded at the same time and attacked Zhang Xuanfeng's body and soul. He wanted to torture others, and now Xiaoyang was giving him what he wanted. He wanted to let him feel what it was like to be tortured. It was as if Zhang Xianfeng had been thrown into a sea of fire. He was constantly being attacked and burned. Even though his body had become tough due to his cultivation, it was still insignificant in the face of such power. The ending was actually like this. Zhang Xianfeng was extremely surprised. It was unreal. Chapter 1686. Under the gloomy sky, there were broken pieces of ice everywhere. Scattered stars dotted the earth like fairies scattering flowers. Although there was no pattern to it, it still looked beautiful. It looked pretty good. Not far away, there was a man in white. His body was covered in dirt, mud, blood, and water. He looked extremely miserable. He lay there with a weak breath. He looked at the gloomy sky and seemed to be deep in thought. On a hillside, not far from here, there was also a man lying down. However, his condition seemed to be much better. His complexion had become rosy, but there were still some areas that were pale and withered. Just looking at him made people feel that he was very strange. A little further ahead, there was a woman. She stood there with a sword in her hand. She didn't care about her tattered clothes. She looked straight ahead with a faint smile on her face. That smile was very happy, as if she had just survived a disaster. Her smile was like a flower. Suddenly, a weak scream disturbed this peaceful world. On the hillside, a man in a black robe was nailed there by a strange-looking sword. He looked to be in great pain. The Thunderfire Divine sword. Two different elements were constantly damaging Zhang Xuanfeng's vitality. Even his soul was bombarded and burned. It could be said that he was extremely pitiful. However, no one pitied him. They just let him hang there and endure the horrible torture. If it was possible, Shen Fian would have personally used her sword to cut off his flesh and bones layer by layer. However, she couldn't muster any strength. She could only stand there and slowly recover. However, when he saw the person who deserved it being tortured, he felt very happy in his heart. Now, Zhang Xianfeng was in a terrible state. His body was charred on the outside and tender on the inside under the double attack of the lightning and flames. There was even a trace of meat fragrance coming from him. It could be said that the vitality in his body had been exhausted. Now his soul was enduring endless torture. If it wasn't for the Thunderfire Divine sword nailing his soul would have left his body and he would have lost his life. But now he couldn't even die. He could only suffer like this in extreme pain. The death aura wanted to invade the already weak divine soul, but under the threat of the Thunderfire Divine sword, it didn't dare to act rashly. It could only watch covetously from the surroundings. At this moment, Zhang Xianfeng was filled with regret. Why didn't he end the battle quickly? Why did he drag things out until now, giving Xiaoyang the opportunity to kill him here, but he would never be able to escape? This level of pain shook his soul to the point that it was on the verge of shattering. If he could do it again, Zhang Xianfeng would choose to end the battle as quickly as possible, and not choose to torture because of his perverted mentality. This would cause him to fail at the last moment, and he could only be tortured here with no hope of surviving. No matter how much pain Zhang Xianfeng was in, no one cared about him. Of course, Xin Fian and Xiaoyang did not have the time to rest either. After the battle, they were completely exhausted and could not move at all. If someone else were to appear at this time, they would really have no way to deal with it. But why were they so unlucky? Xiaoyang lay on the ground. As the remaining medicinal efficacy spread, it began to heal the injuries in his body, and he gradually began to recover some strength. Although it was very slow, it was better than nothing. It was not bad. As long as the person lying on the hillside didn't have any unforeseen circumstances, he could have more time to rest. As for the restless death aura in the surroundings, it was nothing. He could just expel it later, and it wouldn't cause him to lose his consciousness. After a long time, Xin Fian also recovered some strength. After taking a pill, she flew to Xiaoyang's side and did not even look at the guy who was talking dirty. Although Xin Fian's injuries were not light, her spiritual power was mostly exhausted. In addition, the external injuries were not so serious that she couldn't move, so she was the first to recover. Xiaoyang looked at the woman in white, and a smile appeared on his face. Originally, he thought that this woman had always been pampered, and it would be good if she didn't help at this crucial moment. He didn't expect her to be able to make a decisive move at that time. She was really good. If it wasn't for the power of her sword, Xiaoyang would have to spend more effort and even pay a higher price to deal with Zhang Xianfeng. "Are you okay?" Xin Fian hesitated and asked. Xiaoyang smiled and said, "It's not a big deal. The invasion of the death aura is not serious. Once I recover some strength, I'll be able to get rid of it." Xiaoyang was still wary of this woman in front of him, although it could be said that they had gone through thick and thin together just now. They still had to be wary of others. Moreover, women were very strange creatures, and he didn't know when they would do something strange. "Do you need my help?" Xin Fian asked softly. After this battle, this prideful woman, who had always been pampered and arrogant, gradually began to change under the influence of others. Although it wasn't very big, it was still good. Hearing this, Xiaoyang smiled and said, "Just lie down. You don't have to worry. Even if another Zhang Xianfeng pops up, I can still deal with him." Although this sentence was said lightly, it was true. Xiaoyang still had some tricks up his sleeve, so he wasn't afraid. Of course, he didn't want to expose too much. After all, there were too many possibilities in the divine tomb. Sometimes it would be troublesome to expose too much. "If you think it's not enough to vent your anger, you can go and torture him," Xiaoyang said indifferently. The humiliating words from before weren't something that anyone could bear. Xin Fian didn't do anything before because she didn't have the ability to do so. "This kind of trash is simply dirtying my eyes. I don't want to dirty other things," Xin Fian said indifferently. Previously, she did want to cut him into pieces, but now that she thought about it, it was meaningless. Moreover, the torture from the Thunder Fire Divine sword was enough to make him wish he was dead. Seeing that Xiaoyang didn't get up and was still looking at the gray sky, she wondered if there was something mysterious about it. Xin Fian also fell to the ground and wanted to see what was going on. Chapter 1687. Peace was restored between heaven and earth. A group of men and women lay on the ground. Even though there was a dense chill, they did not seem to feel it at all. Instead, they had a carefree look on their faces. It could be said that they were happy and content, enjoying the peace before them. Even if gusts of chilly wind blew, they didn't seem to feel it at all. Under the deliberate control of the woman, the deathly aura couldn't invade them at all. Zhang Xianfeng, who was nailed to the cliff, had now completely turned into a dried corpse. There wasn't a single part of his body that was intact. His divine soul was now very weak. It could be said that it was on the verge of shattering. However, it was restrained by the thunder-fire divine sword. It couldn't shatter, nor could it escape. Normally, Xiao Yang would never torture someone like this. However, Zhang Xianfeng was too vicious. That was why Xiao Yang had to do this. He wanted to let Zhang Xianfeng have a taste of his own medicine and let him suffer so much that he would rather die. After a few hours, Xiao Yang slowly got up and quickly consumed a few elixirs. He began to nourish his divine sense and spiritual power. Immediately, he waved his hand and the silver lightning spear returned to his hand. With another flash, it disappeared without a trace. Looking at the previously arrogant Zhang Xianfeng, Xiao Yang's mouth revealed a trace of a sneer. He originally thought that Zhang Xianfeng was very powerful, but it turned out that he was just SOSO. It was okay for a person to be arrogant and conceited, but it must be built on his own strength and not such an opportunistic arrogance. Therefore, Zhang Xianfeng was also a very good example. As the saying goes, go for wool and come home shorn. Instead, he gave up his great future and lost his life. Immediately, Xiao Yang stepped on the void and appeared in front of Zhang Xianfeng. Suddenly, the weak divine sense seemed to feel a great threat. It was constantly trembling. Obviously, it was extremely frightened. Why bother? Do you have to fight in this place and destroy your soul? Xiao Yang sneered. As the saying goes, if you want to kill someone, you have to kill them to the end. Not to mention, this was the divine tomb. If there was a slight mistake and he turned into a dead spirit, then there would be endless trouble. Moreover, Xiao Yang didn't know much about the immortal realm's Zhang family, but since they were able to nurture these two brothers, it was enough to show that their foundation wasn't bad. Therefore, if he left him alive, he was afraid that there would be more trouble after he got out. Immediately after, Xiao Yang did not want to bother about it anymore. He pulled out the Thunderfire divine sword, and the weak soul was directly shattered. Under the crisscrossing sword chi, it was completely destroyed. After the corpse fell to the ground, it fell a few times and shattered into pieces. After dealing with Zhang Xianfeng, Xiao Yang returned to the original mountain. Seeing that the body of the Sun's Snow Realm cultivator was once again corroded by the death aura, he waved his hand and expelled it completely. So much time had passed, and even with the nourishment of pills, he still hadn't woken up. From this, it could be seen how severe the injuries he had suffered in the past 1,000 years were. Fortunately, he was still alive. As for his cultivation, although there were some fluctuations, as long as he was properly nourished, it wouldn't be a problem for him to recover. Xinfian walked over, and the look in her eyes became more complicated. The man in her eyes was really complicated. He could kill without mercy and humiliate others in a dispute of emotions. However, when he came here, he was still righteous enough to save others. He even almost lost his life here. His actions were hard to understand. What kind of person was he? I'll just guard here. You've almost recovered. Go in and meditate. Xiao Yang said indifferently. Guarding here was just a waste of time. There wasn't much meaning to it. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, was a little worried about whether there would be any changes, so he also needed to observe carefully. Otherwise, if he was careless and caused all his efforts to be in vain, it would really be a waste of time. Xinfian looked at the cave and said, "Let's go in together." Based on Xinfian's previous temperament, she would definitely go in without hesitation. However, after going through a life-and-death battle, she seemed to have understood many things. She knew that no one would treat her well unconditionally. Furthermore, it was Xiao Yang who had risked his life to get the chance to enter the tomb. She was just a guide. Xiao Yang looked at the woman, and a smile appeared on his face. He didn't expect her to change so much in such a short period of time. I hated you before. I thought that Brother Wushuang was unwise to give the spot to you. Now, it seems that he really has good taste. Xinfian was no longer reserved. She sat on the ground as she spoke. Her words reminded Xiao Yang of the blabbermouth Shen Wushuang, who was never serious. He shook his head, helplessly. Come to think of it, you guys are the same kind of people. You hate evil as if it's your enemy. You'll help if you see injustice. You're all true people. Sinn Fein exclaimed. Xiaoyang smiled and shrugged. He said, I'm not as blabbermouth as he is. I don't say anything and even spread rumors. Ever since Xiaoyang had found out the truth behind why he was able to get a spot, he had been extremely touched. However, when he saw Shen Wuxuang in high spirits after his breakthrough, the good impression he had of Shen Wuxuang disappeared without a trace. This guy was really infuriating. No matter what, he never seemed to be serious. He always looked like he was enjoying the show. He even looked a little despicable. It made people feel extremely helpless. However, Shen Wuxuang's character was like that. If he didn't consider them as his true friends, why would he do that? After all, he was the eldest son of De Wangfu in the Divine Realm. He had always had a high reputation. Before he left the Divine Realm, many people thought that he would be the next De Wangfu. Therefore, with such a burden, he had to maintain an attitude when he traveled in the Divine Realm. Brother Wuxuang said that you were determined to get Sister Mingzhu. Was that a blabbermouth or a rumor? Sinn Fein asked curiously, blinking her eyes. Suddenly, the atmosphere seemed to have become a little strange. Previously, Sinn Fein thought that Xiaoyang was a toad. She thought that it was wishful thinking. However, now that she thought about it, he was the champion of the grand competition. His decisiveness did not affect whether he was good or bad. Therefore, he was just a little bit worthy of her sister Mingzhu. You'd better fix your clothes. Xiaoyang sighed helplessly. Sinn Fein only came to her senses when she heard that. Wouldn't her tattered clothes be seen by him? Immediately, a hint of embarrassment appeared on her face. Chapter 1688. However, Sinn Fein realized that Xiaoyang's gaze did not waver. It could be said that he was looking straight ahead. It was as if he did not covet her beauty at all. He did not even take a glance at her. Suddenly, she could not help but feel a sense of loss. Could it be that she was not tempted at all? Thinking of this, Sinn Fein became more and more shy. At the same time, she felt a sense of loss. In the end, she could only think that this man was unromantic. That was why he was like this. Yes, he must be a blockhead. That was why he was like this. Thinking of this, she felt a little better. She did not feel so sad anymore. Soon after, Sinn Fein calmed down and released the spiritual energy in her body. The torn clothes on her body began to heal slowly. Her clothes were originally a magic tool. Although they were a little damaged, they were not completely destroyed. As long as she used her spiritual energy to repair them, she could quickly restore them to their original state. This was the profoundness of this kind of magic tool. Xiaoyang did not notice the emotions of the people around him. His attention was on the sun-snow world cultivator. This was the first person he saved in the tomb of the god of sin, so it was inevitable that he would care about him. After all, how embarrassing would it be if his first attempt failed because he did not notice? However, after investigating, he found that this person's willpower and spiritual energy were very strong. Now, with the help of the elixir, he had begun to heal quickly. Presumably, it would not take long for him to wake up. However, it was hard to say how long it would take. After all, 1,000 years of erosion meant that his spiritual energy would be frozen for at least a few hundred years. No matter which one it was, it would take too long. When one's spiritual energy was greatly damaged, many things were unpredictable. However, it had to be said that if this sun-snow world cultivator's willpower was not extraordinary, he would have become a walking corpse. In that case, Xiaoyang would not have the chance or the means to save him. It could be said that this was mutual. Both were indispensable. Sinn Fein saw that Xiaoyang was in a daze and seemed to be thinking about something. She said, "You don't have to worry. After I get out, I will report to my father what happened here. At that time, it won't be the Zhang family who will cause trouble for you, but me who will cause trouble for the Zhang family." At this point, Xin Fian was still panting with anger. It seemed that Zhang Xuanfeng's character really disgusted her, so she bore a grudge and even wanted to vent her anger on the Zhang family to vent her anger. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly and helplessly. He didn't expect this girl to think that he was thinking about this. It doesn't matter whether Zhang Xianfeng made it out of the tomb of the gods or not. At that time, as long as you and I don't say anything, no one will know. But if you do this, I will really be in trouble. Xiao Yang said with a wry smile. As long as the matter here was not publicized, no one would know. If they really went through that mess, then once the matter was clear, even if the Zhang family suffered a strong blow at that time, it was likely that they would not perish. On the other hand, although Xiao Yang was famous for his fighting prowess, it was inevitable that he would suffer some setbacks. Moreover, the benefits in the realm of the gods were also because of the system of the imperial court. Because of this, many aristocratic families and factions interfered with each other. At that time, it would be really troublesome if they were to pull one hair and affect the whole situation. Although Xiao Yang wasn't afraid of trouble, it was naturally good to have less trouble. As for what Xin Fian would do, he wouldn't have any strong attitude. Xin Fian replied with an, "Oh," looking very unhappy. Now, she didn't look much different from those young girls. "Oh, right, you haven't answered me before. Was that a big mouth or a rumor?" Xin Fian's eyes were filled with anticipation. She looked as if she wanted to get to the bottom of this matter. She really wanted to know the truth. Xiao Yang was also very helpless. This was too gossipy. Moreover, he also had a premonition that no matter how he answered, he was afraid that it would be far-fetched by her subjective assumptions. "We have gone through life and death together. Don't be so petty. Tell me about it." Xin Fian was still looking forward to it. It was as if he didn't give her an answer, she would continue to ask until the end. Being stared at like this, Xiao Yang was also complaining in his heart. This girl's thoughts were really too vivid. "Before I entered the realm of the gods, I only heard the name Princess Mingzhu from Shan Wushuang. Do you think I'm the kind of person who would brag without meeting someone?" Xiao Yang said. Hearing this, Xin Fian supported her chin with her hand. She looked as if she had understood and was deep in thought. "Of course, you're not the kind of person who exaggerates." Xin Fian nodded and said. Xiao Yang also heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Her words were pleasant to hear. He didn't have to be kind to save this girl. However, in the next moment, Xin Fian's eyes lit up. She said, "So, you fell in love with Sister Mingzhu at first sight when you met her after the Jade Pool banquet? That's why you immediately broke through and became the champion. You wanted to attract Sister Mingzhu's attention?" As soon as she said this, Xiao Yang immediately covered his forehead. His face was full of black lines. These love-struck girls really had a rich imagination. It was indeed similar to what he had expected. It was really like that. Previously, he thought that Xin Fian would change for the better if she knew her mistake. Well, now that sense of superiority was back. She didn't know how to judge people. That must be it. Sister Mingzhu is so beautiful and powerful. Who wouldn't be moved by her? Xiao Yang, don't worry. I'll definitely say a few good things about you in front of Sister Mingzhu in the future and leave a good impression. Who knows, maybe it'll really be possible after a long time. Xin Fian looked serious, as if she was making a promise. At this moment, Xiao Yang's heart was filled with helplessness. This girl was a cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years. How could she still be so naive? Or was it that she was so confident in Princess Mingzhu that she thought any man would fall in love with her? However, regarding Princess Mingzhu's appearance, he had only heard rumors. He had never seen her with his own eyes. He didn't know if it was true or false. However, her temperament was fake. It was so good that it made people gasp in amazement. Even in his previous life, it was rare to see a girl like her. Be more confident. You're not bad either, right? Don't be too pressured. We can't catch up to Sister Mingzhu's strength. Xin Fian continued to talk to herself. Chapter 1689. Right now, Xiao Yang's heart was filled with helplessness. The mentality of these little girls was really hard to fathom. Moreover, their imaginations were too good. It was hard to look straight at them. However, he couldn't get angry because of these words. It was unreasonable. Sister Mingzhu is a genius that hasn't been seen in tens of thousands of years in the God realm. She has a good foundation and is recognized as powerful in the God realm. In fact, she can even lead the God realm to an even more powerful place. Therefore, there's almost no one in this world who can match her in terms of aptitude. Therefore, you don't have to feel inferior. This is something that everyone knows. Xin Fian said with a smile. Her eyes were filled with admiration. From this, it could be seen that Princess Mingzhu was like a fairy in everyone's heart. She was high and mighty, making people feel that she was incomparably sacred. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, shook his head, implying, I'm not listening. You're really not bad. You were born in a place with poor spiritual energy, yet you were still able to take first place in the God Realm tournament. This is enough to prove how powerful you are. If you were born in the God Realm, you would definitely be much stronger than now. Shan Fian seemed to want to comfort him. However, these words made Xiao Yang feel that there was some other meaning behind them. It wasn't the same feeling. If I was born in this place, Princess Mingzhu would definitely be far behind me. Xiao Yang naturally criticized her in his heart. He wouldn't say it out loud. However, Xiao Yang really admired Princess Mingzhu. The level 8 Kingwu that everyone in the God realm saw as a shackle could only be broken through after entering the divine tomb. However, she was able to break through so early. Her talent was obvious. In the God realm, the environment was Kingwu level 8. Therefore, this stage could be said to be a shackle. The God realm had a unique advantage and was favored by the heavens. However, there was also an insurmountable mountain, and that was to break through to the level 9 king, Wu level 9. However, it was extremely difficult to climb over this mountain. Misfortune and fortune came hand in hand. Xiao Yang, let me tell you, Sister Mingzhu is very beautiful. Even I feel ashamed when I see her, Xin Fian said with a faint smile. Women could be said to be very jealous, but sometimes when you sincerely praise a person's beauty, it would be an indescribably beautiful existence, causing people to be convinced willingly. Right now, Shan Fian didn't seem to care whether the person beside her replied or not. Her words were like beans pouring out of a barrel. It was as if she couldn't stop talking for a while. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, sat there and listened attentively. However, his thoughts had already drifted to God knows where. After all, so what if Princess Mingzhu was beautiful and powerful? Xiao Yang didn't have the slightest interest in it, so he didn't want to know too much about it. It was meaningless. He might as well comprehend the great Tao himself. Who knows? He might even be able to benefit from it. Suddenly, Xiao Yang frowned. He looked at the cultivator from Sun's snow boundary, and his expression changed. I say, how long are you going to pretend to be dead? Xiao Yang said in an annoyed tone. Who's pretending to be dead? Shan Fian took over the conversation and realized something was wrong. She looked at the cultivator from Sun's snow boundary. She had been talking nonstop just now and had almost forgotten that there was such a person beside her. The cultivator from Sun's snow boundary saw this and immediately sat up. He rubbed his head and said with an apologetic expression, I'm really sorry. I saw that you guys were chatting happily, so I didn't want to disturb you. That's why I didn't dare to move, afraid that I would disturb you too. As soon as he said that, Xiao Yang immediately rolled his eyes at him. He was still thinking about his situation. Who would have thought that, instead of coming out to help him, he was still watching from the sidelines? Wasn't that a little too unkind? I took such a huge risk to save your life for nothing. Such an action is completely equivalent to an ingrate. Then get lost. Don't disturb us. Shen Fian rolled her eyes and said in an annoyed tone. Hearing this, the Sun's Snow Realm cultivator immediately jumped up. He clasped his hands and said, If that's the case, then I'll leave first. Call me after you're done talking. How about it?" As he spoke, the cultivator's expression became even more serious. He winked at Xiaoyang as if he was saying, "I won't disturb you guys from enjoying such a beautiful scenery." Xiaoyang wanted to kick that guy's butt. The first thing he thought about after waking up was this. Looking at his expression, it seemed like he was going to add fuel to the fire. Xinfian covered her mouth and giggled when she saw how interesting this person was. On the other hand, when the cultivator saw the two's attitude, he couldn't advance or retreat and felt very helpless. For a moment, the atmosphere seemed to have become a lot more awkward. The three of them just sat there with their backs bent, not saying a word. It was as if everything depended on eye contact. When the time came, it would depend on who could understand the other's meaning first. After a long hesitation, the cultivator from Sun Snow Boundary probed, "My name is Ji Fei." "I know." Xiaoyang slightly nodded. Ji Fei looked at Xiaoyang's expression as if he was waiting to see what he was going to do. His heart was beating like a drum. What were these guys thinking? "It's not nice of me to pretend to be dead because I don't want to disturb your relationship. But now, I'm in an awkward position. What is going on?" "I'm from Sun Snow Boundary." Ji Fei wanted to break the awkwardness and continued. Xiaoyang continued to nod and said, "I knew it from the moment you attacked." Ji Fei was sweating profusely. "You're done talking, but you didn't give me a chance. Could it be that this was a form of revenge? No way. This young man doesn't look like a petty person. Otherwise, why would he save me? Don't make it difficult for him. Look at his nervous expression. He's almost looking for a place to hide." Shen Fian found it interesting, but still reminded Ji Fei. Ji Fei felt more relaxed after hearing this. This girl is so sensible and generous. It seems that it's not bad for the two of them to sit together. "Thank you, benefactor, for your help. Ji Fei will remember your kindness. I won't forget it, even if I die." Ji Fei saw Xiaoyang nodding slightly. Then he cupped his hands and bowed again. His head was about to hit the ground. Chapter 1690. Although Ji Fei appeared carefree earlier, he was well aware of how dangerous the death qi was and how powerful it was. If it wasn't for Xiaoyang saving his life, the profound ice that was protecting the last trace of his divine sense would have shattered in less than 100 years. At that time, he would have completely become a walking corpse and would never have the chance to be a human again. This could be said to be a life-saving grace, but it was also the grace of a new life. This kind of kindness was like a parent being reborn. He, Ji Fei, naturally saw all of this clearly and didn't dare to be careless. Xiaoyang was also somewhat helpless after the sudden shock, but he quickly helped Ji Fei up and said, "We are of the same kind. We can fight and kill each other. That's our own business. But it's different when the death aura attacks. Everyone will help when they see it." Ji Fei only smiled. That was the truth. However, if such a situation really happened, many people would have directly killed him. Ji Fei smiled faintly. If they could not beat him, they would naturally run away. They would not do what Xiaoyang did. "Benefactor, don't be modest. If you need anything in the future, just let me know. Even if you want Ji Fei's head, I won't frown. I'll cut it off and give it to you," Ji Fei said solemnly. Xiaoyang only smiled when he heard this. However, this feeling made him feel that it was indeed correct for him to make a move. The person he saved was not an ingrate. Those who were grateful were usually sentimental people. Such people were also worth befriending and helping. Hey, I brought him here. Aren't you going to thank me?" Xinfian was elated. She was complacent and looked very proud. Ji Fei smiled faintly and said, "Thank you for leading the way, miss, for bringing me such an opportunity. If you need anything in the future, just let me know. As long as it's within my ability, I guarantee that I'll do it well." The current Ji Fei also looked simple and honest. After the death aura was removed and he was nourished by the elixir, he recovered his original appearance. He still looked sturdy, but he looked a little silly when he smiled. Shinfian was very happy when she heard such a reply. She nodded in satisfaction. She felt that this guy was quite sensible. Her previous efforts were worth it. She was very satisfied. Benefactor, don't feel troubled. I, Ji-Fei, am like this. Although you don't like it, there's nothing you can do. I'll follow you in the future and be your lackey. How about that? Ji-Fei was still smiling innocently. Hearing these words, Xiao Yang blushed with shame. If he knew that this fellow was like this, he would have thrown him far away and left him to fend for himself. Don't call me benefactor, just call me Xiao Yang. Besides, you're at least 1,000 years older than me. I don't feel comfortable calling you that. Xiao Yang glared at him and said. When Ji-Fei heard this, he immediately nodded and said, Yes, benefactor. I understand. Suddenly, Xiao Yang was about to go crazy. Could it be that the 1,000 years of being frozen really made him stupid? That's why he looked like this now. If there was really something wrong with his brain, it would be difficult to cure him in the future. Shinfian stood there and smiled foolishly. She felt that this silly big guy was quite interesting. My name is Shinfian, the girl said. Ji-Fei nodded immediately to show that he knew. Xiao Yang looked at Ji-Fei carefully and even used his divine consciousness to check on him. This guy did not resist at all. He stood there as if he could do whatever he wanted as long as he was happy. In any case, my life is already yours. So what if I let you pry into it a little? After a while, Xiao Yang nodded in satisfaction. The death aura in his body did not exist anymore. Even the broken veins and damaged spiritual soul started to recover slowly. It was as if all living things were coming back to life. It was just that it would be a very long process for Ji-Fei to recover to his peak state. Of course, Xiao Yang could also give him an explosion pill to let him recover quickly, but that was not suitable now. It was like a lake that had been silent for 1,000 years. If there was a huge storm, the small fishes and shrimps in it would suffer. It was good to be stable now. It was not a bad thing to wait for him to recover slowly. Benefactor, am I okay? Ji-Fei asked expectantly when he saw that Lin Fan had retracted his divine consciousness. Xiao Yang rolled his eyes at him. How could he not know the situation in his body? This really made people wonder if this guy's brain had really degenerated. Seeing that Xiao Yang was angry, Ji-Fei continued, Benefactor, I am a little stupid. Don't be angry. Don't call me benefactor, Xiao Yang said angrily. He was a little annoyed. Ji-Fei immediately shut his mouth after being glared at, and he didn't continue to speak. Otherwise, if he really fell out with Lin Fan and angered him with his attitude, wouldn't that be repaying kindness with enmity? He, Ji-Fei, did not want to be such a person. Ji-Fei, how great is the opportunity in the tomb that you are so obsessed with it that you are willing to pay such a heavy price? Shinfian asked doubtfully. Ji-Fei was a genius from the outside world. Looking at his honest appearance, although he was a little stupid, he should not be so obsessed with it. Therefore, the important thing was what was in the tomb. Miss Fian, the martial skills and skills recorded in the tomb are all above heaven class. There are even a few skills that are extremely mysterious. Ji-Fei looked at Xiao Yang and felt that the two of them must have a close relationship. Therefore, he did not beat around the bush and directly said it. Hearing this, Shinfian's eyes lit up. All of them were heaven tier and above techniques. That was truly impressive. She, Shinfian, was a member of the royal family. She could only cultivate one heaven-class skill. Now the tomb was full of skills. This was really tempting. At that moment, Shinfian felt that she was really blessed. Although she almost lost her life, the rewards that she could obtain today were definitely not bad. It might even be a great opportunity for her in the future. Let's go in and take a look. Xiao Yang took a deep breath and said, It was time to take a look at the opportunity in the tomb. Chapter 1691. Hearing Xiao Yang's words, Ji-Fei nodded and walked in front to lead the way. He looked like a little brother and was very clear about his position. This cultivator from the sun-snow boundary, was very active, honest, and funny. This gave Shin Fian a good impression of him. She even thought that he was very interesting. Although she had seen all kinds of people, most of the people in the god world were very polite. It was her first time seeing someone as funny as Ji Fei. Ji Fei walked in front and saw the broken ice. He was slightly startled. At the same time, he praised his benefactor even more. 1,000 miles of dark ice was his specialty. He had to admit that Ji Fei was very powerful to be able to break it. Looking at some places, there were many huge gullies. This was enough to show that there was a big battle after this. Moreover, the strength of both parties was not weak. However, they could only make some inferences as to what exactly happened. It was not enough to know the whole picture. Benefactor, the words recorded in this tomb are very special. They are not from the god world. It's very strange. However, you don't have to worry because the divine intent in the inscriptions are the most important. As long as you can comprehend the divine intent, it will be easy. Ji Fei said with a smile. When Xiaoyang heard this, he nodded his head slightly. He was naturally aware of this point. However, Ji Fei's explanation was well-intentioned. He did not say anything more. It was just that this form of address really made people unhappy. However, Ji Fei was like this. No matter what you said to him, there was no way to change his mind. Therefore, although there are many opportunities, it's hard to say if there will be a share that belongs to me. Ji Fei hesitated and said, it could be said that there were opportunities everywhere in this divine tomb. However, to be able to obtain them, it would depend on fate. Shin Fian frowned slightly. She did not look very happy. Although she roughly knew that this was the case, she was a little upset when she thought about not being able to obtain all the opportunities. If her luck was bad, she might not be able to obtain anything. Of course, benefactor, if you want all of them, after I get out and comprehend the divine intent, I will write them down. However, I can't guarantee that it's the original flavor. At most, it's 80% similar. Ji Fei continued. Xiaoyang and Shin Fian rolled their eyes at him at the same time. The higher the level of a cultivation technique, the more likely it was that the difference of a single word could cause a huge change, or even cause one to go berserk. With your 80% similarity, wouldn't you be leading people astray? Seeing their ugly expressions, Ji Fei knew that he had wasted his breath, so he shrugged helplessly. Wait, you said all of them? Could it be that you have comprehended all the inscriptions in this tomb? Shen Fian asked in surprise. Ji Fei helplessly laughed bitterly and said, I'm just bragging. Not all of it, but half of it. At this time, they also entered the tomb. At a glance, there were 9 stone steels. There were a lot of them. However, these 9 stone tablets were not all of them. There were also many words engraved on the walls. Taking a closer look, there were at least 20 different cultivation techniques recorded. If Ji Fei really obtained half of them, how lucky would he be? You're really amazing, Shin Fian said in shock. Hearing this, Ji Fei smiled with satisfaction and said, Amazing, right? Do you want me to tell you how I did it? Immediately, Shen Fian nodded her head crazily. She really wanted to know. If she could comprehend half of the divine decree, she would definitely benefit a lot. It was even possible for her to soar into the sky after she got out of here. How could anyone not be tempted by this? Hurry up and tell us. Shan Fian saw that he did not continue and urged him. Xiao Yang ignored the two of them and started to wander around. He first looked around to see if there was any suitable divine intent for him. Actually, it's nothing. However, the risk is a little high. After experiencing it personally, I feel that it's not worth it. Ji Fei said softly. Shin Fian rolled her eyes at him. She looked like she was saying, Hurry up and tell me, or I'll beat you up. Ji Fei glanced at his benefactor, thought for a moment, and said, That is, the death energy in this tomb is somewhat similar to the divine intent of these inscriptions. So as long as you draw the death energy into your body, you will be able to form a natural sense of intimacy with these stone tablets. The more death qi you absorb, the closer you'll feel, and the easier it will be to comprehend. If you want me to die, just say it, Xin Fian said. She waved the sword in her hand and directly slashed at Ji Fei. Of course, with the scabbard, they were just fooling around. Ji Fei also cooperated with her and ran away. He did not resist at all and let the woman chase after him. I'm not joking. This is what I concluded with my life, Ji Fei said. This was indeed his personal experience. At that time, it was also because of this that he took the initiative to invite a wolf into the house. Later on, he became more and more obsessed, which led to the excessive death qi. In the end, he was unable to save himself. Therefore, in the end, he chose to seal the last strand of his soul in ice to give himself a chance of survival. If it wasn't for my benefactor, I really would be gone, said Ji Fei. Suddenly, Xin Fian stopped. If that was the case, then Ji Fei was telling the truth. If that was the case, then she could give it a try. Ji Fei's expression immediately changed. He felt like he had come up with a terrible idea. Perhaps this girl really would be like him in the past and have evil thoughts. Usually, this kind of temptation was fatal. It would make people fall into the abyss without any hesitation. In the end, they would be unable to extricate themselves and sink into it. Miss Fian, don't have such thoughts. After all, there is only one benefactor, said Ji Fei. He also looked at the man who was strolling leisurely. Xin Fian frowned slightly when she heard that. She sighed helplessly inside. Yes, there was only one Xiaoyang. If she really went down this path, if she did not meet Xiaoyang after 1,000 years, wouldn't she be gone? She could only give up on such thoughts in the end. Although she was extremely tempted, she still had to know her limits. Miss Fian, there's no need to be upset. After all, how much you can get depends on your luck. There aren't many here, so why don't you try your luck elsewhere? After all, there are opportunities everywhere in the divine tomb. Why worry about not finding them? Ji Fei comforted her. Chapter 1692. After saying that, Xin Fian felt a little better. That was the logic. The tomb of the god of sin was huge, and there were countless opportunities left in various places. Sometimes, if one could only see the benefits in front of them, it was equivalent to giving up the entire forest for a forest. This comparison was very clear. It was not worth it. Even if the treasures in the tomb were worth it, who would be able to help her take that step in the future? After all, Xiaoyang was only one person. There would not be a second Xiaoyang even after 1,000 years. Because of a trace of obsession, she had forced herself into a dead end. If there was no one to help her, she would not be able to return. She might even lose more because of this. Ji Fei seemed to realize that he had said something that he should not have. He turned around and left to look at the inscriptions. He did not feel good about it. If this silly girl really believed what he said, then he was afraid that he would really have committed a sin and harmed her. After a while, Xin Fian sighed and stopped thinking about it. Instead, she sat on the ground and began to comprehend the true meaning of the inscriptions. After all, time was tight. Hence, she needed to comprehend it properly. Perhaps he would be able to obtain quite a bit of favor and obtain a great opportunity because of it. That was something that could not be determined. Xiaoyang was very carefree. He was not in a hurry to comprehend it. Instead, he walked slowly in the tomb. At the same time, his gaze was constantly wandering around the inscriptions. It seemed like he was looking for something. However, there was no change in his expression. No one knew what he was thinking. On the other hand, Ji Fei was very lively. However, he tried his best to restrain himself and did not make any noise. He was afraid that he would disturb Xin Fian, who was in the midst of comprehending the inscriptions. Looking at the inscriptions, Ji Fei's eyes were filled with nostalgia and regret. He had paid a great price but was unable to obtain all the divine decree in the inscriptions. It was inevitable that he felt a little regretful. However, in this tomb, he was able to obtain a trace of divine decree. This was enough to make him extremely happy. Ji Fei, on the other hand, managed to comprehend half of the divine will. It was clear how lucky he was. Of course, the price he paid was also disastrous. Seeing that his benefactor seemed to be hesitating, he slowly walked over and said, "Benefactor, if you don't know where to start, I can give you some suggestions. For example, the inscriptions I know are more suitable for you." When Ji Fei spoke, he also tried his best to lower his voice, so as not to disturb others. Xiao Yang shook his head indifferently and said, "You and I both know that everyone has their own fate. If we really end up empty-handed because of our goal, isn't that just wasting time?" As soon as these words were spoken, Ji Fei smiled honestly. Although that was the logic, there might be a pleasant surprise if he tried it sometimes. Of course, it was best to let nature take its course. He would take as much as he could, and he would not become obsessed with it. He might even go astray, and the risk would be too great. "Benefactor, you're open-minded. I can't compare to you. That's good too. After all, under great temptation, many people easily fall into a dead end and can't extricate themselves in the end," Ji Fei said with a bitter smile. He could be said to have reached the extreme of this method. Going astray was a very heart-wrenching process. Of course, it was also because of this experience that his mentality gradually began to change. Xiao Yang only smiled faintly and did not reply. He continued to walk. Xiao Yang wanted to see if the inscriptions on the tablet would become close to him, and he could easily obtain some opportunities. Xiao Yang walked very slowly with every step. Sometimes he would stop to observe carefully. Although he did not recognize the words and could not understand them, he could still read the inscriptions. However, it was a good experience to be able to decipher some divine intent from the vertical and horizontal lines of the characters. Ji Fei, on the other hand, followed behind obediently. Because of Xiao Yang's previous words, he did not interrupt or explain easily. After all, sometimes good intentions could lead to bad things. Therefore, it was not a bad thing to not speak sometimes. On the other hand, Ji Fei became more curious. What is this young man's background? It's rare for him to have such a good mentality. Although they were at least 1,000 years apart, Ji Fei did not underestimate him at all. After all, the young fellow's courage and strength could not be underestimated to be able to help him remove the death qi that had lingered in his body for 1,000 years. Xiao Yang walked slowly. After a few hours, he finished reading all the inscriptions in the tomb, but he did not comprehend any of the divine intents. This made him smile bitterly. Could it be that all these opportunities are not fated to be with me? Benefactor, don't be discouraged. If you can see the clues at a glance, what's the mystery in it? If it's really done, what will happen to us? Ji Fei said with a smile. Xiao Yang suddenly turned around and looked at Ji Fei. "You don't have to follow me. Don't you need to comprehend it? That's fine. I've already gotten pretty much everything. Since you're interested, I'd like to try to guide you." Ji Fei still had a smile on his face and was very attentive. Xiao Yang waved his hand, indicating for him to stop talking and to comprehend in peace. Ji Fei immediately nodded and bowed. He did not want to disturb Xiao Yang. Since he had decided on how to comprehend it, there was no need for Ji Fei to do anything unnecessary. Moreover, their own opportunities could not be easily interfered with. Soon after, Xiao Yang walked to a wall and slowly sat down. He began to comprehend the inscriptions. Perhaps it was the work of ghosts and gods, or perhaps it was the work of fate, but he sat in front of the inscription like a ghost and gods. He looked at the words that he did not recognize, but he could only start from Xingyi. In other words, as long as there was some resonance between the two, they could communicate their divine intents and comprehend some of the profundities. As for how much they could comprehend, it would depend on how compatible they were. Sometimes the path of cultivation was so mysterious that no one could explain it clearly. Moreover, these top techniques were even more so. They emphasized the inheritance of the divine intents and not the appearance. As long as one could obtain some of the divine intents, they would naturally be able to change the appearance and use the seemingly illusory technique. It was extremely mysterious. Chapter 1693. Seeing as Xiaoyang was meditating like an old monk, Ji Fei did not disturb him. Instead, he fixed his gaze on an inscription on the tablet. Even though he had obtained all the opportunities he could in the past 1,000 years, he might not have any more opportunities, even if he continued to try. Therefore, he simply gave up on that idea and began to comprehend the things he had already learned. As the saying went, one would learn the new by reviewing the old. Only by comprehending more of some techniques and constantly perfecting them. Moreover, Ji Fei also had another worry in his heart. He was afraid that there would be a mistake in the things he comprehended in the primal chaos state. This was to prevent any deviation in his cultivation and cause him to walk into a bottomless abyss. Therefore, he had no choice but to be careful. He looked at it again and compared it. However, after sensing that the divine wills were extremely accurate, there was no problem. Therefore, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Sure enough, while the death chi could lead one into a bottomless abyss, it could also give one a spiritual connection to comprehend the profoundness within. At this moment, Ji Fei could not help but ponder a ridiculous idea. Why was the death chi able to get close to the tablet inscriptions? What kind of mysteries were hidden in this? It was really thought-provoking. The more Ji Fei thought about it, the more he felt that the idea was extremely absurd. Nonetheless, he could barely stand on the absurd side as if things were how they were and nobody could change them. It was very interesting. Needless to say, there were some thoughts that did not need to be said out loud. It was enough to hide them in one's heart. If some words were said out loud, it would be disrespectful and blasphemous. As time continued to pass, Xiaoyang was like an old monk in a meditative state. He gradually saw some divine intents in the form of the inscriptions. That kind of feeling could be said to be extremely mysterious. It gave one an indescribable feeling. All of a sudden, he also felt that there was a tiny person in his heart that was constantly brandishing a sword. Streams of sword intent were constantly surging out. Every time the sword was waved, Xiaoyang's consciousness seemed to be engraved. The sword intents kept appearing and turning into something that belonged to him. It was as if everything had been imperceptibly engraved into his mind. This inscription was a very mysterious sword technique, but Xiaoyang only obtained a few moves of the divine intent. Moreover, those divine wills could be said to be intermittent and could not be connected. But even if it was just one move and one sword, it was enough to benefit him greatly. At least, it could be said that within King Wu's realm, if one could comprehend it properly, it would be of great benefit. At the same time, Xiaoyang could clearly sense that the divine will contained within was not something that a cultivator of King Wu's level could slash out. Therefore, the seniors who were able to leave behind these divine wills must have had cultivations above King Wu's realm. In other words, those divine wills contained the divine will of the next level, which was equivalent to guiding the way. It could be said that this was also the opportunity that many of the Almighties in the God realm relied on to advance to the next great realm. Even if the sword intent could only spread out a line, if it could be continuously nourished and widened, it would one day become a great path to the heavens and successfully enter the next realm. Of course, Xiaoyang also knew the mysterious theory of the next realm, which was why he could so easily conclude the wonders within. As for whether the others would have such thoughts, that was another matter altogether. After further consideration, Xiaoyang also realized that the sword technique inscription on this inscription was not complete. He did not know if it was because the almighty ancestor could not leave it behind when he died, or if it was because of the passage of time, causing the divine will to be missing. Of course, there was a possibility between the two. As for which one it was hard to say. After all, it was unknown how many years ago, so there might have been some omissions in the records of the God realm. Not to mention, he was an outsider, so he did not know the reason behind it. On the other hand, the sword intent gave Xiaoyang a lot of inspiration. Imperceptibly, even he himself did not know that his understanding of the lightning fire sword technique had begun to rise. The white-clothed lady seemed to have gained something by chance. Looking at the inscription on the inscription, she seemed to be intoxicated. Obviously, she was completely absorbed in it and obtained the divine will within it. Moreover, she began to wholeheartedly comprehend it. With more than 20 techniques, as long as one's aptitude was not too bad, one would naturally be able to obtain some benefits. However, as for how much one could grasp, that was another matter. After an unknown period of time, Xiaoyang also slowly stood up. Looking at the inscription on the inscription, he slightly cupped his hands. Within it, he had already comprehended all the mysteries that he could. Even if he continued to sit there, he would naturally be able to gain something. However, it would be very small and would take up a lot of time. There was no need for that. What he obtained was the divine will of the nameless sword technique. This sword intent emphasized on speed, accuracy, and ruthlessness, using the sword to slash out the tyrannical power of a saber. It could be said that this was poles apart from traditional swordsmanship. However, after all, an almighty person could be whimsical and could also put it into practice. Therefore, with a lot of experience, he could do it. Although the divine will of the sword technique was incomplete, it still allowed Xiaoyang to make a lot of progress in swordsmanship. Perhaps it was not obvious now, but after a period of time when he used the sword again, there would be a huge difference. Immediately, Xiaoyang patted the dust on his clothes and walked out. Sitting in there was indeed a very depressing thing. He wanted to go out for a walk to relax his mind, but looking at the gray sky, he felt oppressed for a moment. His original idea was also gone. The tomb of the god of sin was so dry and boring that it was unbearable. Suddenly, Xiaoyang seemed to have thought of something. He walked forward and carefully looked for something at the bottom of the hill. At the bottom of the hill, there were broken limbs everywhere. The skin and flesh were burnt and almost turned into dried corpses. It was unbearable to look at. That was Zhang Xuanfeng's corpse. After falling down, it fell to the ground and smashed into pieces. After searching for a long time, Xiaoyang found a jade bracelet. He happily picked it up. This was what he was looking for. Zhang Xuanfeng's family was not poor, so the things that he left behind must be very precious. Since he had contributed, if these magic treasures were left behind in the tomb of the god of sin, they could only be buried. Chapter 1694. Xiaoyang immediately used his divine sense to invade the jade bracelet. Although it was attacked by the divine sense imprint left by Zhang Xianfeng, the imprint was easily erased as if it had no roots. Taking a closer look, Zhang Xuanfeng's wealth was really not bad. He had countless heaven-grade magic tools, which could be said to be a dazzling lineup. It was a pity that there was no saint-grade magic tool, so there was nothing he could use. Although he was a little disappointed, it didn't matter. After all, he couldn't use it. When he brought it back, he could reward the outstanding disciples of Northern Light. As for some elixirs, Xiaoyang accepted them without hesitation. After all, there was no spiritual power in this divine tomb. Whether it was injuries or recovery, he could only rely on these elixirs. Although Xiaoyang prepared a lot, the more the better. After searching for a long time, the corners of Xiaoyang's mouth curled into a smile. The thing he wanted to find the most this time was naturally the token that would allow him to leave the divine tomb. This was what he cared about the most. With a flash of light, it appeared in his hand. "Benefactor, what's the good news? Why are you smiling so happily?" Ji Fei walked out and asked cheerfully. Hearing this simple and honest voice, Xiaoyang's eyebrows unconsciously furrowed. This guy was really like a lingering spirit. Soon after, he withdrew his divine sense and put away the jade bracelet. Although the treasures inside were not good enough for him, they were very useful to others. What's more, wealth was originally accumulated slowly. Even if it was not good enough, it was still a heaven-grade magic tool. You have been in the divine tomb for thousands of years, Xiaoyang suddenly said with a serious face. As soon as these words came out, Ji Fei's expression became a lot more serious. He nodded very solemnly. He also understood the meaning of his benefactor's words. He could get almost all the opportunities. Even if he continued to stay, he was afraid that there would not be much benefit. Furthermore, he had been attacked by the death aura for 1,000 years. Although he had pills to help him recover, some injuries required certain elements to heal, such as sunlight. Moreover, because he had been invaded for 1,000 years, it was easier for the deathly aura to corrode him again. At that time, if he was the slightest bit careless, he was afraid that he would repeat the same mistake. At that time, whether or not he would still be so lucky as to have someone lend him a hand would be another matter. No one could say for sure. Benefactor doesn't need to worry. After I familiarize myself with the techniques I have comprehended, I will leave the divine tomb and wait for your return in the divine world, Ji Fei said with a smile. Hearing this, Xiao Yang nodded in relief. Since Ji Fei had such an understanding, it was not a bad thing. He did not need to waste his breath. It could be said that there were no benefits for him to stay in there. Instead, it was all bad. Afterwards, Xiao Yang directly tossed the medallion in his hand to him and said, "Take care of yourself. After all, it's not easy to wake up." Ji Fei chuckled as he received the medallion. A sense of warmth rose in his heart. His benefactor had treated him well. If he followed him in the future, he would definitely not be taken advantage of. The simple-looking man's heart was as clear as a mirror. Naturally, he could see through some things very clearly. "Don't worry, benefactor. After what happened before, I naturally know what to do," said Ji Fei. Xiao Yang only smiled indifferently. He sat on the ground and looked at the gloomy sky. The feeling of oppression in his heart seemed to ease up a lot. Now, the shattered ice had all melted, turning into droplets of water that merged with the ground. The heavy chilliness had vanished at the same time, and the deathly aura had filled the place once more. Ji Fei stood there as well. He knew that it was very easy for him to become obsessed if he stared at the inscriptions for too long. As a result, he would come out for some fresh air every once in a while to stabilize his mind, which was why he had come out now. "Benefactor, aren't you going to persuade Miss Vian? If she continues like this, it'll be very easy for her to become obsessed. At that time, it might cause some trouble," Ji Fei said in the end after hesitating for a long while. He voiced his worries. Naturally, Xiao Yang was aware of this as well, and he was well aware of it. However, it was not the right time to persuade her now. After all, Shen Fian had finally managed to gather herself after so much difficulty after going through so many things. If he tried to persuade her now, he might not be persuading her, but pouring cold water on her. Both he and Ji Fei had been through a lot, so they knew how to control their emotions. However, Shen Fian was different. "We'll see when the time comes," Xiao Yang said helplessly. Ji Fei nodded and gave him a thumbs up. He said, "That's right. As long as Benefactor is here, nothing will happen to Miss Fian." It sounded like a compliment, but there was something strange about it, as if it was referring to something else. Xiao Yang did not mind it. After all, this simple and honest man was a little funny. Sometimes he did not know how to control his words, and there was no limit to his teasing. If you answer the question, "I'm afraid you'll talk nonstop when the time comes," at that time he would be annoyed, so he might as well keep quiet and not reply to him. Since he had nothing to say, he naturally quieted down. "Benefactor, I think Miss Fian is not bad-looking. Even if you admire Princess Mingzhu, it's fine. After all, it's normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Don't you think so?" Ji Fei smiled and tried to find a topic to talk about. After Ji Fei woke up, he heard Shen Fian talking about Princess Mingzhu, so he listened to some of it. Hearing this, Xiao Yang was speechless. It was not easy to trap that gossipy woman with the inscription. Now, a man like you is also so gossipy. What was going on? Could it be that he really could not get along with that Princess Mingzhu? "Benefactor, you might be inexperienced in the world, so you can't let go of it. However, don't be afraid. Being able to have 3 wives and 4 concubines is a skill. Once you get used to it, you won't feel guilty," Ji Fei said with a look of someone who had been through it before. He spoke with joy, as if he had experienced many beauties. Xiao Yang covered his forehead with his hand. What sin did he commit to save two people who talked so much? It really gave him a headache, seeing his benefactor's uncomfortable expression. Ji Fei still had a faint smile on his face, as if he was ready to help him out. Chapter 1695. Benefactor, look at you. You're a man of striking appearance. Your strength and temperament are top-notch. More importantly, you have the world in your heart. This kind of spirit is enough to defeat countless men. Therefore, you're also a capable man. It's natural for you to take care of more girls. Besides, what's wrong with having a lot of wives and concubines? Or are you ashamed to face madam? Don't worry, as long as you share the benefits. Your relationship won't be bad. Ji Fei continued to speak, without stopping. At this moment, Xiao Yang was regretting it. Why did he have compassion at that time? Now, he had simply found himself a huge problem. It was a headache. Moreover, the two of them seemed to like to take advantage of him. They really didn't know how to read people's expressions. A virtuous wife will naturally help her husband take in concubines. If madam doesn't agree, then it's her fault. Women, just scare them a little. If it doesn't work, just coax them. Anyway, if the soft approach doesn't work, just use the hard approach. Of course, it's best to use the hard approach. They all fall for it. As Ji Fei spoke, he even gestured as if he was speaking from experience. Shut up. Xiao Yang really couldn't take it anymore, and scolded loudly. Ji Fei saw that his benefactor was suddenly so angry. He didn't know where he slipped up. He sat there with an innocent look and didn't even dare to breathe. His ears finally quieted down a little. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, was lying on the ground, feeling much more comfortable. He just wanted to come out and rest. This guy was really good at disturbing his thoughts. Shinfian and I only met by chance. It's not the kind of relationship you think it is. After a long time, Xiao Yang finally spoke and explained the whole story. Hearing this, Ji Fei was stunned for a moment. Then he sighed. No one knew what he was thinking. I think Miss Fian's feelings for you are not as simple as meeting by chance. Ji Fei thought for a while and felt that it would be better if he didn't say it out loud. Thus, he said what he thought in his heart. Xiao Yang frowned. Didn't this mean that he was the one who provoked her? If that was the case, then he really had to think of a way to escape. Otherwise, the more entanglements there were, the more changes there would be. Benefactor, please don't speak of this matter in the open. It will be very hurtful. Ji Fei immediately spoke when he saw the change in Lin Fan's expression. When Xiao Yang heard this, he frowned slightly and laughed bitterly. There was no need to care about this matter. It was best to leave it unsettled. After all, sometimes, the more you do, the more mistakes you make. Suddenly, the world seemed to have quieted down once more. No one spoke again. There were some things that he was well aware of, but he had no way to deal with them. After a long time, Xiao Yang also felt that he had rested enough. He once again entered the ancient tomb and began to meditate. After all, this was something that could not be neglected. Furthermore, with Ji Fei's previous experience, Xiao Yang realized that the tomb of the god of sin was not a place where one could stay for long. Therefore, he had to find an opportunity that he was satisfied with as soon as possible and leave this place quickly. The inscriptions on the tombs were like heavenly books. No one could see any clues at all. Shinfian was still sitting there, but her expression had changed quite a bit compared to before. It could be said that she was beaming with joy and her face was full of satisfaction. Even her robe was fluttering without wind, which made her look very impressive. Ji Fei came in later. When he saw this situation, his eyes revealed a trace of surprise. He did not expect this lady to be so talented. Her opportunity was also very good. She could actually comprehend the divine decree and even reveal it on the surface. One must know that these divine decree directly fell into the sea of consciousness. The reason was very simple, which was that it could be accommodated. However, the appearance of it on the surface was because there was too much divine decree. It was impossible to swallow it all in a short period of time. That was why it was like this. For a moment, Ji Fei's heart was filled with envy, as expected of someone from the divine realm. Compared to outsiders like them, it could be said that they had a huge advantage. That natural closeness was something that no one could compare to. However, this was not something to be envious of. After all, this was the battlefield of the divine realm's martyrs. The techniques that they left behind would naturally be closer to their descendants. There was nothing to be said or compared. Otherwise, it would be strange if outsiders like you could comprehend it more easily than other people's descendants. This was also the reason why Shenfian was so powerful. Ji Fei had also seen some of the divine realm's geniuses being at a loss on some of the inscriptions. Sometimes opportunities were just like that. You couldn't use common sense to describe them. You never knew when they would take care of you. This time, Miss Fian has profited greatly. Ji Fei smiled slightly. He then walked to a stone tablet and sat down in front of it. He continued to review the past and learn new things. At this moment, Shenfian had also entered a very mysterious state. At the same time, her strength had also started to change because of the divine intent. Although it was very small, it was still ongoing. If this continued, it would accumulate from little to much. It might even turn from a small river into a big river, and finally into an ocean. It was not impossible. The divine decree seemed to have taken the initiative to recognize her as its master. It stuck closely to the white-robed lady's body as if it was afraid of being abandoned. As time passed, the divine decree also gradually merged into Shenfian's body and became a part of her strength. When the last strand of divine decree entered Shenfian's body, the stone tablet that she had been comprehending on made a kacha sound. Cracks appeared on it, and it quickly fell down, stirring up dust and flying everywhere. Shenfian opened her eyes. Instantly, a trace of golden light was emitted. After a flash, her eyes were filled with shock. Why was the inscription destroyed just like that? She was sitting here, but she did not do that. Miss Fian, there is no need to be surprised. You have taken away all the divine decree in the inscription. The stone tablet has long decayed. Without the support of the divine decree, it would be normal for it to shatter. Moreover, even if the inscription was still there, it would be meaningless. Ji Fei seemed to have seen through her worries and explained patiently. Without the divine decree, even if you learned the outer appearance of the inscription, it would just be a mere decoration. Congratulations, Miss Fian. You are able to comprehend all the divine decree in the inscription and learn a peerless cultivation technique. Your future is limitless. Ji Fei smiled and complimented her. Chapter 1696. When Shenfian heard this, she laughed happily. She seemed to be more spirited than before. It was as if what she had comprehended earlier had brought her great benefits. Even her strength had improved qualitatively. It could be said that she had benefited a lot. Ji Fei just smiled and didn't ask for more details. If you asked about other people's opportunities, it would inevitably attract other people's attention. Are you afraid of my things, or what? Moreover, it was best not to ask too much. As an outsider, it was best not to ask too much. Look, after praising her a little, she smiled so happily. She looked quite beautiful and was pleasing to the eye. This was already good enough. Since you have benefited, take a rest. Don't follow in my footsteps and develop an obsession. By then, it will be too late for regrets. Ji Fei kindly reminded her. Hearing this, Shenfian immediately nodded her head and thanked him. She was extremely happy in her heart. Seeing that Xiaoyang was like an old monk in meditation, she did not want to disturb him. Thus, she ran out of the room. Not long after, loud laughter could be heard. It was obvious that she was extremely happy. The laughter from outside was very bright. Ji Fei also smiled enviously and shook his head, helplessly. These young people were really enviable. No matter what, they were full of enthusiasm. As for him, he was old now and was no longer as pure as before. No matter how happy he was, he could not be as naive and romantic as her. What a naive and silly girl. She is so happy now, but I don't know if she can still be so happy in the future. As Ji Fei said this, his gaze fell on Xiaoyang. In the end, he sighed helplessly. Given the current situation, he could not say much. At that moment, he felt a little sorry for the girl. After encountering such a situation, it really made him feel very helpless. However, this was something that could not be helped. Who asked the falling flower to fall in love with the heartless brook? Then, Ji Fei shook his head and did not think about it anymore. He continued to review the past and learn new things. After all, if many things were exposed, it would be really boring. It was even normal to offend people because of this. Therefore, it was best for him to keep his mouth shut. As long as he was clear in his heart, it would be fine. After a long while, Shen Fian's state of mind finally calmed down. Once again, she entered the cave and prepared to continue comprehending. However, she was a little restless. It seemed that because of the joy from before, she was a little unable to restrain herself. She was a little restless and was unable to calm her state of mind. Fortunately, that joy gradually subsided, allowing Shen Fian to focus on comprehending the opportunities within the stone tablets. In order to comprehend the divine will, one needed to resonate with it. Before that, it would be a very boring period of time. It could be said that it was very difficult to endure. Of course, for those cultivators, if they saw these inscriptions, they would place all their attention on them and not feel bored at all. During this time, Xiaoyang was also tired of sitting, so he went out for a walk. He didn't just sit there, he relaxed his mood before coming back in. It was the same for Ji Fei. He studied the old and knew the new, so it was much easier for him to comprehend. However, he also restrained himself. As long as he gained something, he would go out to calm himself down. He didn't want to be obsessed and cause more trouble. That wouldn't be good. On the other hand, Shen Fian was like a fish in water in this tomb. Just sitting here, she was like a fish in water. She was able to comprehend some of the true meaning within. If she continued to go deeper, she would be able to gain more things. This was the advantage of the cultivators in the realm of the gods. They were naturally close to each other. This was also something that no one could change. Therefore, they were able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Of course, it was also because of this that many cultivators of the god realm became even more obstinate and obstinate. Therefore, if many cultivators in the realm of the gods had a strong obsession from the start, it would be very difficult for them to leave this place. One's temperament was also an important factor. If one was not careful, one would fall into a bottomless abyss. In the end, one would only end up with one's body shattered. Very few people could change such an ending. It could be said to be very miserable. Ji Fei went in and out a few times. He saw that Shen Fian didn't move at all. Instead, she was gradually getting better. This made him feel both happy and worried. However, when he turned around and saw Xiaoyang, the smile on his face deepened. With him around, there wouldn't be any accidents. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about this matter. Gradually, Ji Fei gained some understanding of this benefactor of his. This guy's temperament was considered good. The way he dealt with people wasn't bad either. Ji Fei had a good impression of him. As for the specifics, Ji Fei would only be able to find out after he understood more. After the inscriptions on the stone tablet turned into a stream of divine intent and entered Xiaoyang's body, he slowly got up and walked out gloomily. After spending so much time, he only managed to comprehend a trace of the fist intent. Although it wasn't that there were no benefits, it still made him feel that it wasn't enough. With such a mentality, it was naturally not good for him to continue sitting there. Therefore, he walked out directly and prepared to adjust his mentality. After exiting the ancient tomb, he saw the burly man sitting on a mountain top as if he was looking at something. Then Xiaoyang walked over slowly and said softly, "Looks like you're done revising the old and learning the new. You've been waiting here for so long. I guess you're waiting for me to come out and say goodbye." Ji Fei's expression froze. Previously, he was still thinking about how good his benefactor was. Now he directly said what he wanted to say. This was really annoying. It seemed that sometimes being too smart was really annoying. Ji Fei nodded and didn't deny it. He said, "That's right. You also said that there's no point for me to continue staying here." Naturally, he was well aware of this. Now, as the power in his body recovered, some things couldn't be suppressed any longer and needed to be released. It could be said that this was also the reason why Ji Fei had to leave. If it wasn't for the fact that he was about to explode, he would have wanted to follow his benefactor and escort him along the way. This could be considered as repaying some of his benefactor's kindness. It was just that if he were to forcefully suppress the accumulation of 1,000 years, it would only do him more harm than good. Xiaoyang nodded and said, "All right, I understand. Let's leave now. There's no need to be so hesitant." Chapter 1697. These words made Ji Fei feel uncomfortable. "Do you want me to leave so badly? Or is it that you're a sanctimonious guy who wants me to leave so that you can be a romantic gentleman again, because I'm here to disturb your good fortune? But you still need to maintain the image of a gentleman? You don't have to be in such a hurry. There are some things that need to be made clear." Ji Fei sighed. He really did not have the slightest temper toward his benefactor. After all, he still needed to be polite to his benefactor. Although Ji Fei wanted to vent his anger, he had no choice but to swallow his anger. "There's nothing to say. Everyone understands," Xiaoyang said indifferently. Now that Ji Fei's power was somewhat out of control, Xiaoyang naturally knew what was going on. He was about to break through, which was why he was acting like this. Moreover, this breakthrough could be considered a great opportunity. It could repair his body that had been ill for a long time, and it was even possible for him to surpass his sharpness back then. Therefore, no matter what, it would be beneficial to leave as soon as possible. "Benefactor, I think you've noticed it too. However, I still need to tell you again. Don't break through in the divine tomb. Otherwise, the death chi that you'll be infected with at that time will be more difficult to deal with than a monster like me who has been infected for 1,000 years and has developed spiritual intelligence," Ji Fei said solemnly. Xiaoyang nodded. He naturally understood this point. After breaking through, both one's power and spirit would grow stronger. The nourishment outside was spiritual qi, which was only beneficial to them and had no harm at all. However, the divine tomb was full of death qi. If one was careless, the death qi would mix into one's spirit and meridians, which would be a headache. Even though Ji Fei's sea of consciousness was completely invaded, he left behind an incomparably pure spirit with a secret technique, so he could do whatever he wanted. If he was infected by the death chi because of his breakthrough, he would end up with broken bones and connected tendons. That's right. Benefactor's mind is very clear. You know this too, or you wouldn't have saved me. Often, those who drown are capable of water, so don't try it. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable. Ji Fei was still a little worried and warned. Xiaoyang smiled and said, "I know. Don't be so wishy-washy. Let's go. Wait for me to go out and have a drink. When the time comes, you can say whatever you want." Ji Fei also shook his head helplessly. He looked at the handsome man in front of him and sighed helplessly. "I think you're just too open-minded. You understand the ways of the world." In terms of cultivation, he had great foresight and was a top genius. Unfortunately, there was a fatal flaw in certain areas. You win some, you lose some. Nothing is more important than this. Ji Fei laughed out loud. Xiaoyang only rolled his eyes at these words and remained unmoved. "You sometimes don't just focus on cultivation and call me fellow Taoist," Ji Fei continued. Hearing this, Xiaoyang's expression changed deliberately. He lifted his foot and looked like he was about to kick Ji Fei's, but seeing this, Ji Fei immediately rushed forward and said, Okay, okay, okay. I won't say any more. I'll leave. After saying that, Xiaoyang smiled when he saw Ji Fei take out the token to leave. It's not a bad idea to keep one more token. The tomb of the god of sin is very strange. It's hard to say what will happen. It's better to be prepared, Ji Fei said and returned the token that originally belonged to Zhang Xianfeng to Xiaoyang. Then, Ji Fei crushed the token that belonged to him. Immediately, he turned into a purple ray of light and flew toward the dark gray sky. Fallen flowers are willing to fall, but the heartless flowing water is afraid. Benefactor, you must know that when the flowers are ready to be plucked, you only need to pluck them. Although Xiaoyang was unhappy and wanted to kick Ji Fei, he had already turned into a purple light and rushed out of the tomb of the god of sin. Even if he wanted to settle the score, he would have to wait until he got out. He looked at the token in his hand and gently tossed it up and down. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile. He did not know what the extra token could be used for, but it was not a bad idea to keep it. After all, it was better to be prepared. At that time, even if there were any unforeseen events, he could deal with it. Xiaoyang sat on the ground and looked at the purple light that streaked across the sky. It was especially dazzling. Very quickly, the gloomy clouds began to gather once again. They gradually swallowed the light that had been drawn out, and everything returned to normal. Gusts of chilly wind blew like the whimpering of ghosts. After lying down for a long time, Xiaoyang turned around and entered the ancient tomb again. He had regained his composure. However, he did not know what else he could gain. Nevertheless, there was nothing wrong with giving it a try. Moreover, Xiaoyang had not fully recovered from his injuries and the loss of his divine soul, so he was not in a hurry. Even if he wanted to continue looking for opportunities, he would have to wait until his injuries were fully recovered. Even with the help of elixirs, the speed was too slow in this place where the deathly aura was everywhere and there was no trace of spiritual energy. He even had to use some spiritual energy to protect himself so that the deathly aura could not invade him. After entering the cave, Xiaoyang saw that Shenfian's body was filled with divine intent again, and it was constantly floating around her. Xiaoyang's mouth twitched a few times. It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. He had only obtained a few wisps of sword essence and a wisp of fist essence, but she had already started to comprehend the second skill. Moreover, she had comprehended all of it. She was really lucky. As the saying goes, misfortune and blessing are interdependent. This was probably what it meant. However, it was hard to say what kind of changes would happen to Shenfian in the future. Moreover, the two skills that she had comprehended were of the heaven level. Her strength would probably be greatly enhanced. At the very least, among the 8th Order martial kings, she would not be considered a weakling. She might even be able to enter the rank 9. Opportunities were so wonderful that no one could be envious of them. Sometimes, when an opportunity arrived, it was enough to change a person's life. Xiaoyang was not jealous. Instead, he was happy. This woman would no longer be beaten by Zhang Xianfeng to the point where she could not fight back. Soon after, Xiaoyang saw that Shenfian was fine. He turned around to find a stone tablet and continued to comprehend. Chapter 1698. The true intent danced around Shenfian's body as if it had recognized her as its master and could not wait to merge with her. However, she could only take in so much true intent at once. She needed time to digest it, so it was very slow. Usually, it would take a long time for a single strand of true intent to enter her body. When all the true intent had been absorbed, Shenfian opened her eyes. Instantly, a strong sword radiance was emitted. It was as if her eyes were an extremely sharp sword that was constantly emitting sword radiance. It was very frightening. However, the sword radiance disappeared very quickly. In the blink of an eye, her eyes returned to normal. However, the smile at the corner of her mouth became wider because of this. She was clearly very happy. Clearly, she had also benefited a lot this time. Her harvest was quite bountiful. However, She did not hear that honest voice for a long time. When she looked around, she only saw Xiaoyang sitting there. She could not help but feel a little disappointed. I've received so many benefits. Is it possible that no one will come over to compliment me? Shen Fian was afraid that her excitement would affect Xiaoyang. Therefore, she quickly walked out of the room and laughed heartily outside. She seemed to be very happy. However, Shen Fian's laughter quickly stopped. She thought that Ji Fei was taking a breather outside. However, she did not see him and was momentarily stunned. Then, she laughed bitterly and understood what was going on. At this time, Ji Fei must have left. After all, it was not suitable for him to continue staying here. Therefore, it was only a matter of time before he left. Perhaps it was because she had never been praised before, but Shen Fian's disappointment seemed to grow even greater. She sat there gloomily and seemed to be a little angry. She gently drew a line in front of her with her finger. The hillside did not change at all. It was as if nothing had happened. It was as if nothing had happened. In fact, the hillside had been directly cut open by her finger. However, the sword was too sharp and fast. Moreover, it was very restrained. There was not a trace of aura leaking out. Therefore, there was no movement at all. Even after being cut in half, it was still as usual. It was obvious how exquisite the sword was. In such a short period of time, his progress was so terrifying that it could only be said to be inconceivable. This was what it was like to be a favored child. As long as the opportunity came, they would be able to soar into the sky. A satisfied smile appeared on Shen Fian's face. She finally understood why everyone who entered the tomb of the god of sin was full of praises when they came out. This kind of change could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth. However, what Shen Fian didn't know was that her comprehension was like a fish in a dried pond. In the future, this kind of supernatural power would no longer exist in the tomb of the gods. After playing for a long time, Shen Fian turned around and entered the cave. She was ready to continue comprehending. She was now full of confidence and wanted to give it a try to see if she could gain more benefits. After all, one more divine ability would greatly increase one's strength. Therefore, no matter how lucky he was, he had to continue trying. Perhaps he could really obtain all the inheritance in this ancient tomb. At that time, his strength would be even more powerful. After entering the tomb, she saw that Xiaoyang seemed to have comprehended something, so she didn't disturb him. At the same time, she changed to sit down and continued comprehending. However, she was a little restless now. Occasionally, she would sneak a glance at Xiaoyang. At this moment, Xiaoyang's comprehension in the tomb had also made some progress. It wasn't like before, where he could only comprehend a little bit of the divine decree after comprehending for a long time. It was as if the divine decree in this tablet was one. It directly smashed into Xiaoyang's body and fell into his sea of consciousness. The divine decree was so powerful that it could be said to be extremely overbearing. It was like a meteorite falling, directly smashing into his sea of consciousness. Even his body couldn't help but tremble. In an instant, Xiaoyang's sea of consciousness was in turmoil and went blank. It could be seen how terrifying the power of this true intent was. After calming himself down, Xiaoyang looked at the ball of true intent and couldn't help but take in a breath of cold air. This was the first time he encountered such a situation after entering the tomb of the god of sin. It could also be said that this was the biggest opportunity he had ever encountered. However, whether or not he could swallow it was another question. He was even a little worried that he would choke to death. However, this thought was only for a moment. The bigger the opportunity, the bigger his appetite would be. He could swallow it. Soon, the meteorite-like divine decree began to surge and turned into countless little people. They were constantly punching in his sea of consciousness at an extremely fast speed. Those fist techniques also looked very ordinary. Moreover, they began to slow down, making them look very ordinary. It was as if these fist techniques could be bought on the streets of the lower region. Could it be a return to the origin? Since there was such a big ball of true intent, it naturally wouldn't be an ordinary fist technique. So what exactly was it? It was really thought-provoking. Therefore, Xiaoyang was very patient. He carefully experienced the fist techniques of those little people. He wanted to see if he could find any clues. However, after careful observation, this was indeed a very ordinary fist technique. It could only be used to strengthen the body and prolong one's life. To ordinary people, this was indeed a good thing, but to cultivators it was very useless. However, soon, Xiaoyang also found that the fist technique had some changes. It became much better and more powerful. It could barely be considered a low-grade, yellow-class martial skill. Of course, it was still a little forced. As the divine decree continued to evolve, the fist technique became more ferocious. It could be considered a mid-grade yellow-class martial skill. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's heart was filled with countless doubts. Soon, the fist technique continued to evolve, and it continued to level up along the way. Ji Fei said that it was a heaven-class martial skill. How could there be an unorthodox situation? As the fist technique of those little people changed more and more, Xiaoyang's heart became more and more shocked. This kind of technique was really shocking. How patient was the person who created this fist technique to be able to cultivate it when he was an ordinary person and constantly improve it until he was so powerful now? All of a sudden, those little people all fell down. Like flowing water, they invaded his sea of consciousness. True Intent Manifestation Art. Chapter 1699. The true intent was very gentle, and it easily invaded Xiaoyang's sea of consciousness. Moreover, it also began to merge with his sea of consciousness at an extremely fast speed. Suddenly, Xiaoyang opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with shock. It was as if something unbelievable had happened, causing him to feel incomparably shocked. Originally, he thought that the true intent manifestation art was a heaven-class martial skill with boundless power and was very domineering. Moreover, it was very easy to learn. Even an ordinary person could use it, punch after punch, then continuously break through the realm and comprehend the true intent within. Through this, one would become even more powerful. Finally, if one could cultivate this fist technique to the heaven class, it could be said to be complete. However, Xiaoyang was wrong because this technique was not a technique. It was actually a cultivation technique for refining one's body. Therefore, this caused Xiaoyang to be incomparably shocked. That fist technique was only the outer appearance. The true key was to train one's body and make one's body tyrannical. Immediately, Xiaoyang also laughed. The person who created this technique was truly amazing. It could be said to be endlessly wondrous. How difficult was it to comprehend a heaven-class martial skill? If one's realm was not enough, perhaps many people would not be able to comprehend it. However, this true intent manifestation art was different. Even if one was an ordinary person, one could start from the most basic place and cultivate the realm one punch at a time. At that time, one could continue to move forward and cultivate accordingly. To be able to create such a complete set of cultivation techniques, if one did not have great ability and patience, it was really not something that anyone could do. It could be said that if this technique could be passed down, it was enough to allow many people to obtain considerable benefits. Of course, there was also a prerequisite, and that was that one needed to have enough patience. This fist technique was very simple. There was nothing difficult to comprehend. Everything was logical, and there were no shackles to speak of. However, this was a great test of one's patience. One needed to practice one punch at a time and could not be lazy. This cultivation technique could be said to be very stupid, but it could give everyone a chance to cultivate. This was the true wonder of this technique. The true meaning of these fist techniques was not to practice the fist techniques, but to use the fist techniques to mobilize the spiritual energy in the body and circulate it between the tendons and meridians to nourish the body. Every time the spiritual energy struck, the body would receive some impact. Under these gentle impacts, the body would constantly grow stronger. Many a little makes a mickle. As long as one could persevere, the rewards would naturally not be underestimated. In fact, it would be very impressive. However, as for how much they could obtain, that would depend on their own efforts. He knew that it was only after reaching the 8th level of Kingwu that he was qualified to start practicing. The mystery of it was to cultivate a breath of Qi. This was also a very mysterious saying. If this breath could be condensed, it could form armor, making one's body as strong as a demonic beast. In the same realm, one would be almost invincible. In other words, before one could cultivate the true meaning within, one would always be weaker than others. However, once the true meaning was comprehended, one would be the strongest existence. As for the previous refining of the tendons and meridians, Xiaoyang could naturally skip it. As the saying goes, different roads lead to the same destination. The cultivation technique that he used to cultivate his body was similar to this. Therefore, he only needed to go through it once, and then comprehend the will within it, and that would be enough. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang's heart was very satisfied. Originally, he felt that he was almost there in terms of body refinement. He could only rely on the silent thunder pearl to continue his cultivation. But now, with the help of the true intent manifestation art, he could continue to refine his body and not wander aimlessly. This could be said to be a timely help, resolving his current worries. As for how powerful the so-called breath of Qi was, he could only wait until he had cultivated and fought in the future to know. However, it was not bad to use it to cultivate his body and improve the realm of his physique. It could be said that the true meaning manifestation art was a genuine cultivation technique. Because it was relatively stupid, there were not many requirements. So it walked the path of pure cultivation. After calming himself down, Xiaoyang went out to rest for a while, then returned to continue comprehending the mysteries of the inscriptions. However, Xiaoyang's highlight was only that one body tempering divine ability. Perhaps it was because of his body tempering that he was able to take such a shortcut and obtain it. Later on, he comprehended some saber essence and spear techniques, but they were only a glimpse. They were very little and did not form a set. Of course, this was not a problem. As long as he could turn these true meanings into his own things, he could comprehend them properly. It would be of great help to him. One had to know that these true meanings were the painstaking efforts of those seniors. Its value was huge and not trivial. When he felt tired, he went out for a walk to relax. After obtaining some true meanings one after another for a long time, Xiaoyang did not gain anything and left the ancient tomb to cultivate the true meaning manifestation art outside. At the same time, his injuries were almost healed and he could continue on his journey. However, Shen Fian had not come out yet, so he was not in a hurry to leave. After all, they were still friends. It was not bad to say hello. After an unknown period of time, Shen Fian walked out of the ancient tomb, discouraged. She did not look very good and was pouting. Obviously, she was very disappointed. Previously, she comprehended the two cultivation techniques smoothly and benefited a lot. However, towards the end, she only obtained a few strands of true meaning. Compared to before, it was like heaven and earth. This time, she had sat there for so long without any progress, so she felt a little displeased. "How was your harvest?" When Shen Fian saw Xiaoyang, the gloominess on her face was swept away. She looked much more lively. Xiaoyang exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. He thought for a while and said, "Although I was not as lucky as you, at least I obtained a complete cultivation technique. It is not bad for me." Hearing this, Shen Fian smiled. She was very happy. "Haha, it seems like I am still the best." To be able to obtain two complete cultivation techniques, Shen Fian said with a smile. She looked very proud. Now, she felt much better. Xiaoyang was so powerful, but he only comprehended one cultivation technique. And now, wasn't he much more powerful than him? Chapter 1700. The young girl was somewhat pleased with herself, appearing naive and romantic. It was as if she had completely forgotten the danger she had encountered and where she was now. Instead, she had a carefree appearance, like a child who had received candy. She was overjoyed. Looking at this naive and romantic girl, Xiaoyang also smiled faintly. Her opportunity this time was indeed extraordinary, causing others to be very envious. However, it was not easy for him to maintain such a good state of mind at this point. This was good too. There was not so much worry to speak of. Even if she met with a bigger setback in the future, she would be able to adjust her state of mind in time and would not fall apart. What do you plan to do next? Are you going to stay and study those inscriptions? Xiaoyang thought for a while and asked. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. Xiaoyang felt that he would not be able to make any progress here, so staying was not a good idea. However, this girl was different. She had the bloodline of the realm of gods, so she might be able to make some progress. Xinfian shook her head and said, "Even if I continue to stay here, I'm afraid I won't be able to make any progress. I think you're tired of staying here. Let's continue together." Hearing this, Xiaoyang's eyebrows furrowed slightly. Originally, he wanted to part ways here, but looking at this girl, it seemed like she wanted to travel with him. Why? Are you afraid that I'll be a burden to you, so you don't want to go with me? Xinfian seemed to see through his worries and asked timidly. Hearing this, Xiaoyang could not reject her no matter what. After all, if he rejected her now, it would be too hurtful. No, I just wanted to ask about your plans. Since there's a beauty going with me, I can't ask for more. Xiaoyang said as he stood up and walked in front of her. Upon hearing this, Xinfian was overjoyed. She was very satisfied with such an answer. Then, she followed behind Xiaoyang. As long as this man was around, no matter what kind of danger she encountered, she would not be afraid. Back then, Zhang Xianfeng was so powerful, but he was still killed by Xiaoyang. He could rely on her, and that was all. When he walked past a mountain peak, Xiaoyang felt a sense of discontinuity. When he took a closer look, he realized that the mountain peak had been cut in half. Suddenly, he was a little surprised. Who could do such a thing without anyone noticing? Of course, he didn't think too much about it. After all kinds of things could happen in any situation. This was undeniable. Perhaps it was something that happened a long time ago. The two of them walked together. Although they encountered some dead souls along the way, they were all relatively weak. Although there were some powerful ones, they were not Xinfian's opponent. It was also because Xinfian wanted to test how much she had improved during this period of time that she was the one fighting. It was a way to hone her sword Dao. It had to be said that its growth was also very high. Its sharpness was a world of difference compared to before. It was obvious that he had comprehended a good sword technique in the ancient tomb. That was why he had such strength. At the same time, from the sharpness of her sword, it could be seen that the mountain peak was cut in half by her. In such a short period of time, there was already such a huge growth. It was unbelievable. This was the wonderful thing about the tomb of the god of sin. If one could obtain all of the divine decree, their growth would be terrifying. Of course, there were some reasons for this. It was the blood and sweat of the ancestors of the god of sin. Their insights were contained in it. If one could master it, the benefits that one could obtain would naturally be extraordinary. Along the way, they also encountered many stone tablets. However, they did not obtain much. They only obtained a few bits and pieces of divine decree. Later on, they found a tomb and obtained quite a lot. However, compared to before, it was a world of difference. In any case, this was the process of many little drops making an ocean. It was not possible to become a fatty in one bite. Moreover, there was the issue of opportunity. This was too mysterious, and it was difficult to explain in detail. Xiaoyang, after we get out of here, I'll definitely tell Sister Mingzhu about your deeds. By then, you'll definitely be able to leave an impression on her. As for what happens after that, it's up to you to fight for it. Shan Fian was also very enthusiastic about this topic. Instantly, Xiao Yang's face was full of black lines. He was really helpless. Do you people from the God of Sin like to matchmake so much? Or is this habit of matchmaking a common origin? However, it was Shan Wushuang, that blabbermouth, who started spouting nonsense. In the middle, even Ziying expressed that she could speak up for him. Now, even Xin Fian, who was his enemy, had started to say the same thing. This was really a headache. This big family, they were really like a family. If you don't answer, that means you're admitting it. Moreover, you're a man. Why are you so shy? Is it because you have low self-esteem? I've already said that there's no need. No one can compare to Sister Mingzhu, Xin Fian continued when she saw that Xiaoyang had kept his mouth shut. She did not care about his feelings at all. Now, Xiaoyang was about to go crazy. In the end, he simply shut off his hearing and walked in front, relying on his divine consciousness to check out the situation around him. Xin Fian, on the other hand, did not feel tired at all. She did not seem to notice that anything was wrong either. She was still talking to herself. She was talking to herself without realizing it. Moreover, she was extremely happy. For the first time, Xiaoyang found this world to be rather wonderful. Now he was also certain that Shen Wushuang's blabbermouth was not a coincidence. Their family had such a bloodline. There was nothing he could do about it. All of a sudden, a terrifying thought appeared in Xiaoyang's mind. If Shan Wushuang and Xin Fian were together, one on the left and one on the right, he might really break down. It was also because of Xin Fian that the journey was not considered boring. After walking for a long time, a person appeared in front of them. He was dressed in white and held a fan in his hand. He looked extremely carefree, like a young master who was on a sightseeing tour. It was as if this harsh environment was nothing to him. He seemed to be in the mood for a sightseeing tour. He looked very comfortable. Seeing this figure, Xiaoyang frowned slightly. He felt that this person was somewhat familiar. It was normal for him to be familiar. It was not impossible that they had seen each other during the God Realm tournament. Chapter 1701. Very quickly, the white-clothed young master seemed to have noticed that someone was looking at him. He turned around, and after seeing clearly who it was, a smile appeared on his face as he quickly rushed toward Xiaoyang and the other young master. At this moment, they saw the true face of the young man in white. It was Jiang Feiyun, the second on the hidden dragon roll. During the outer competition, he chose to give up when Xiaoyang was enraged so that he could fulfill Xiaoyang's wish. Jiang Feiyun's strength could be seen from his position as the second on the hidden dragon roll. Although he was no match for Xiaoyang, he could still cause a lot of trouble for Xiaoyang if he fought with all his strength. He might even be seriously injured. It would be more difficult for Jiang Feiyun to fight with him in a seriously injured state. Therefore, Xiaoyang had a good impression of this young master, who was very good at judging people and was willing to help others achieve their goals. Brother Jiang. When Xiaoyang saw that Jiang Qin was approaching, he cupped his hands and greeted him with a faint smile. Jiang Feiyun rubbed his eyes hard. He felt that what he was seeing was unreal. How could these two people be walking together? Originally, he thought that he must have stayed in the tomb of the God of Sin for too long, so his eyes were blurred. However, when he looked closer, it was the same. Why? Don't you want your eyes? Xin Fian asked. Jiang Feiyun chuckled and said, Brother Xiao, Princess Fian, I'm sorry. My eyes were injured in the tomb of the God of Sin, so they are useless now. Xin Fian rolled her eyes. Jiang Feiyun, you have such good eyesight. How could you lie like that? However, Jiang Feiyun was indeed muttering in his heart now. Logically speaking, Xin Fian was on Shan Luo's side. Now that she was walking together with Xiaoyang, it seemed that they had a good relationship. What was going on? This was really puzzling. Or did something happen in such a short period of time? Or was it just a charming facade? After that, he shook his head and stopped thinking about it. This was truly too infuriating, and he couldn't figure it out. It seems that Brother Jiang has gained a lot this time. Now, you can't even suppress the power in your body. I'm afraid You're already half a step into rank 9. Xiaoyang sensed carefully and asked with a smile. Jiang Feiyun did not try to hide anything. He frankly admitted, "That's true, but I still have to hold back a little. After all, there are opportunities everywhere in the tomb of the god of sin. I don't want to leave so early or take the risk of breaking through here." Xin Fian's eyes widened instantly. She had originally thought that her opportunity was pretty good. Who would have thought that Jiang Feiyun was about to break through? This was really incomparable. However, on second thought, he was ranked second on the Hidden Dragon leaderboard. He had always been ranked second, even when Unrivaled God was ranked first. Therefore, it was not strange. After all, good preparation was the key to success. Therefore, Xin Fian felt better. She couldn't even enter the Hidden Dragon rank. So how could she compete with the second genius? Wouldn't that just add to her troubles? Then, congratulations, Brother Jiang. Xiaoyang chuckled. After that, the three of them chatted for a while. After all, they were not close friends, so they stopped before going too far. There was no need to say too much. As the saying goes, strangers the first time, friends the second time. This was only the second time they had met. They were just talking about some of their encounters in the tomb of the god of sin. After chatting for a while, Jiang Feiyun left alone. Xin Fian also invited him to go with her, but he declined, saying that he had something else to do. At the same time, he also told Xiaoyang that there were a few great opportunities in the center of the tomb of the god of sin, and he could try his luck there. This was what his father told him, but Xin Fian did not know about it. Of course, the reason was simple. Xin Fian's family naturally knew how strong she was. If they told her this news, it would only harm her in the end, and she might even lose her life because of it. When Jiang Feiyun left, he deliberately glanced at the two of them, and there was a lot of confusion in his eyes. In fact, Jiang Feiyun felt that it was very good for him to go with Xiaoyang to the center of the tomb of the god of sin to look for opportunities. They could be said to be a strong team, and they could be more confident. However, the situation had changed. Now that Xiaoyang had someone by his side, if he stayed, it would be a big spoiler. At that time, not only would he be an eyesore, but he would also be bullied. Why bother? Therefore, it was better for him to go alone. If he was lucky, he could meet one or two fellows who had the same temper, and that would not be bad. Now, Jiang Feiyun could not understand Xiaoyang more and more. It was really strange that he could make Xin Fian look at him in a new light. Maybe fate was like this. It was too wonderful for words. Xiaoyang invited Jiang Feiyun to look for opportunities with him, so that he could share some of the pressure. He did not expect that he would be rejected so resolutely, which made him feel helpless. How smart was Jiang Feiyun, and he knew what was going on, so he would definitely not get involved in this. Then, the two of them continued to move forward. Xin Fian was still talking about some things in the God realm, but of course she talked more about Princess Mingzhu. She talked about how amazing her cousin's talent was. In just 100 years, she broke through to the 9th level of King Wu and suppressed all the geniuses in the God realm. Princess Mingzhu was not on the Hidden Dragon list because, when the assessment started, she had already broken through to the 9th level of King Wu. She left the list, and countless people could only sigh. Therefore, she was not considered a genius. She was simply a goddess who had descended to the mortal world. It was better for them, the geniuses of the mortal world, not to compare with her, so as to avoid making the geniuses of the headquarters unhappy and embarrassed. She was a godlike existence, high and mighty and unparalleled. Xiaoyang listened quietly. At the same time, he was very impressed with Princess Mingzhu, who was like a goddess who had descended to the mortal world. A woman who was blessed by the heavens and could still endure hardships to break through to the next level. She was indeed very powerful. Moreover, the God realm was a more traditional world, but Princess Mingzhu was able to convince the masses. It could be seen how terrifying she was. Unknowingly, the two of them had already walked 1,000 miles. They did not gain much, only a little bit of true meaning. Most of the time they spent on digesting the opportunities they had obtained. After all, it was not so easy to completely comprehend a heaven-level cultivation technique. After walking for a while, they saw a stone tablet. When they walked over, they found that someone was sitting there, comprehending. He was dressed in black and had an extraordinary temperament. Chapter 1702. The man was dressed in a black robe with a jade pendant at his waist. His temperament was extraordinary. Clearly, he was cultivated from a high position. Just by sitting there without moving, he exuded a noble aura. It was not something that could be faked, but something that could only be cultivated by a real person in a high position. However, when Xin Fian saw the robe, she looked as if she was struck by lightning. Her face turned ugly. She never thought that she would meet him here. Moreover, it was when she was traveling with Xiaoyang. For a moment, she was at a loss as to what to do. This situation was really unexpected. More importantly, she did not know what to do now. She felt very uncomfortable in her heart. Looking at the man, Xiaoyang frowned slightly. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. He did not expect that they would meet in this place. It was indeed a rare thing. However, there was no harm in that. He could just walk around them and ignore them. Even though Xiaoyang didn't care, it didn't mean that the man in black didn't care. He slowly stood up, and his tall figure was revealed. He was like a god. He slowly turned around and looked at the man and woman. His face was full of heroic spirit, but his eyes were a little strange. When they looked at each other, Xiaoyang shook his head, helplessly. It seemed that he could not leave even if he wanted to now. This man was Shen Luo, who humiliated the Yang siblings and was beaten up by Xiaoyang. After seeing Xiaoyang, Shen Luo's anger surged. His status in the god realm was extremely high, and he was respected by everyone. However, this outsider actually dared to humiliate him in public. How could he accept this? How could he tolerate such behavior? For a moment, the atmosphere became tense. A great battle seemed to be about to break out. At a glance, it could be seen that Shen Luo's aura was much more restrained than before. He could be said to be in high spirits. He had probably obtained a lot of opportunities in the divine tomb. Moreover, he had settled down and his strength had increased greatly. There was not the slightest sound of words. It was as if the sound of breathing had become clear in this quiet world. When Shen Zhuang's gaze landed on the woman in white, he frowned slightly, clearly very displeased. At the same time, a flame of anger burned in his heart. I was the one who brought you into the divine tomb with my own strength, but now you're traveling together with someone who has a grudge against me. Moreover, you're even chatting and laughing. Isn't this going a bit too far? He must be a fence-sitter, leaning to the other side as soon as the wind blew. Xin Fian was also very nervous. Perhaps it was because she felt guilty, but she didn't dare to look directly into Xin Dai's eyes. She was also very conflicted. This was the so-called bad luck. Although he hadn't thought about this problem before, he had coincidentally encountered it. It made him feel uncomfortable, and he didn't know how to deal with it. It was really uncomfortable. Xin Mo didn't want to pursue the matter, but his hatred was very real. Moreover, his thoughts were very pure. He had to return the humiliation he suffered with a punch. He couldn't just let it go like this. For a moment, Xin Fian wanted to say something, but she hesitated. She knew very well that even if she tried to explain, the final result would be that the matter would only become worse and more unclear. This was probably what fate meant by toying with people. I didn't think we would actually meet here. After a long while, Shen Dai spoke first. Hearing these words, Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said, "It is indeed quite a coincidence." At this moment, Xiaoyang also sighed helplessly. This was because he saw a trace of black gas lingering in Xin Dai's eyes. Clearly, he had been attacked by the death aura. Xin Dai's strength and temperament were both top-notch existences, so he naturally wouldn't be attacked by the death aura. However, nothing was absolute in the world. On the contrary, it was very easy for someone like Xin Dai to be attacked without even realizing it. This was because geniuses like him were very arrogant and possessed top-notch strength. Therefore, they were very confident and didn't believe that the death aura would corrode them. Even if it did, it would only be something that could be cleansed in an instant. Of course, there was another point, and that was that Shinde's obsession was too heavy. This was the main reason why he was being corroded without realizing it. Even though Xiaoyang had a conflict with Shinde's in the past, he didn't think too much about this matter. Looks like your mouth is really not bad to actually be able to make Fian treat you nicely. Shinde's hesitated for a moment before speaking. When Shin Fian heard this, she was extremely nervous. She stuttered and said, "Xiaoyang saved me." However, she didn't know if it was because she felt guilty or something else, but her voice became much softer as she spoke. The corners of Shinde's mouth curled up slightly with very complicated emotions. No one knew what he was thinking about. However, his appearance was very unbearable. Xiaoyang waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "Sometimes you just want to be number one too much. That's why it's very easy for you to walk into a dead end. Indeed, you can rely on this desire to go very far, but once you let it go, you'll probably find that you've walked into a dead end. You'll be in a dilemma." "Are you lecturing me?" Shinde sneered. His eyes were full of disdain. "I've obtained the best resources and insight in the God realm, but you're just a bumpkin from a remote village. How can the things you've come into contact with be as exquisite as mine? If you preach like this, won't it make people laugh their heads off?" Xiaoyang immediately shook his head helplessly. This guy's obsession was really too deep. Moreover, his hatred had washed away his reason. He simply didn't know what he was talking about. This was normal. Everyone's temperament was different. That's not it. I just feel that there isn't any deep hatred between us, so there's no need to make our relationship so tense. Xiaoyang said straightforwardly. Although they had some conflicts in the past, that was all in the past. There was no need to keep harping on it. Divine Perplexity snorted coldly. Although it was easy for him to say that his reputation had been completely ruined by Yi Shiwen. "What? You want to bury the hatchet with a smile? If this were to spread, I'm afraid you'll become a joke." Of course, Xiaoyang wasn't the one being humiliated, which was why he said it so easily. If he was the one being humiliated, he could also be so magnanimous as to persuade Xiaoyang. However, the situation wasn't like that. Chapter 1703. Xiaoyang couldn't help but sigh when he saw Shen Luo's current state. This was the way things were and no one could change it. Moreover, it seemed impossible to persuade Shen Luo to let go of his obsession and take a step back with just a few words. This made things very difficult for him. After all, Xiaoyang had received the God realm's favor, and the God Emperor had high expectations for him. Therefore, there was no need to fall out with the imperial family. The God Emperor would be the one in a difficult position. Therefore, if it was not for the sake of the monk, but for the sake of the Buddha, why not take a step back? However, sometimes, even if you wanted to take a step back, it depended on whether the other party was willing to give you the chance. Yes, we don't have a deep grudge, but I'm not happy about it. Shen Luo frowned and said sternly. A sense of danger appeared in Shen Luo's heart. Of course, it wasn't a threat to his life, but an emotional one. Those brothers and sisters who had relied on him seemed to be flocking to Xiaoyang. It was as if he was about to replace his position in the God realm. This was Shen Luo's greatest worry. He was the strongest existence among King Wu's rank 8. However, with the appearance of Xiaoyang, the situation had changed. Xiaoyang shook his head and sighed helplessly. Looks like we have no choice but to fight today. Indeed, Shen Luo's lips curled up slightly as he said that. No matter what, he had to avenge his humiliation today. He had to beat this outsider into the ground and let him know that his position was unshakable. His position was unshakable, and the humiliation he had suffered back then would be returned 100-fold. Big brother, can we not fight? Xiaoyang saved my life and helped me obtain many opportunities. For my sake, let's forget about this. Xin Fian hesitated for a long time before she mustered her courage and said, "The tomb of the god of sin was extremely dangerous. Previously, when Xiaoyang helped to save them, they encountered Zhang Xianfeng. All of them had almost died there. If the two of them fought, it would be a fight between two tigers, and both of them would be seriously injured. After that, if there were any more twists and turns, it would be hard to say. Since you've saved Fian, then I won't kill you. Consider it a life for a life," said Divine Sorrows coldly. Hearing this, Shen Fian's brows furrowed together. She was at a loss as to what to do now. It seemed that it would be wrong for her to help anyone. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, used a secret technique to inform Xin Fian, saying, "Xin Luo has already been affected by the Qi of Death. Just go to the side and hold the line. Don't let others take advantage of you." When Shen Fian heard this, a hint of panic flashed across her face. Upon closer inspection, she realized that there were indeed some changes in her brother. After hesitating for a while, Xin Fian gritted her teeth and retreated. She was very clear that with her current strength, there was no way she could stop this battle. Therefore, she could only go and hold the line to prevent another Zhang Xianfeng from appearing. Seeing his cousin leave, Shen Emo smiled with satisfaction. Now that there was no one else in the way, he could be at ease and make his move boldly. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, still had a nonchalant look on his face. It was as though he did not take his opponent seriously at all. After all, he was just a defeated opponent. There was no need to pay too much attention to him. Moreover, how to get Divine Sorrows to cooperate seemed to be something worth pondering over. After all, he couldn't possibly beat him to death, right? Doing so would be somewhat unkind. "Do you know that after I lost, I've been thinking about how to defeat you? After entering the tomb of the god of sin and gaining some insights, I believe that you're no longer my match," said Divine Sorrows with a cold smile. Previously, he was at the peak of King Wu's rank 8. Now that he had improved again, his strength was even greater than before. Therefore, there was no possibility of him being defeated now. Instantly, a powerful aura was emitted again. It was especially oppressive. It was as if there was an endless amount of fist contained within that aura. In an instant, Xiaoyang's heart trembled. It seemed that Divine Sorrows had gained a lot this time. However, it was understandable. They had a natural affinity with the inscriptions in the tomb of the god of sin. It would be strange if they did not gain anything. "Since you insist on fighting, then let's do it. After the fight, you'll feel good," said Xiaoyang indifferently. Hearing this, Divine Sorrows smiled. That was indeed the case. It was as though there was a bottomless rage in his heart that needed to be vented with his fists. If it continued to accumulate in his heart, it would only make him feel more uncomfortable. Xin Fian, who was watching from the side, was also very conflicted. She did not want to see either of them get hurt. However, she could not stop it. No matter which side won, she would not be happy. On one side was her cousin, whom she respected in the past, who had helped her a lot. On the other side was her friend, who had helped her and pulled her back from the wrong path. Later on, when there was an opportunity, he did not hesitate to bring her along to search for it. During this period of time, Xin Fian got along well with Xiaoyang. She found that although he was indeed simple-minded in some areas and did not understand a single thing, his character was not bad. At this time, Divine Sorrows did not continue speaking. With a low roar, he directly used the gilded battle body art. Immediately, strands of golden light appeared on his body as though they were solid. When he fought with Xiaoyang for the first time, he did not let his guard down. It was the same. After knowing how powerful Xiaoyang was, he naturally did not dare to be careless in the slightest and had to go all out. Seeing that Divine Sorrows was proceeding in an orderly manner, Xiaoyang also let out a low roar and gathered a breath in his chest. It was a breath of will. Since that was the case, he did not mind trying out the true intent manifestation art. Although he had not comprehended it for a long time and had not grasped the essence of it, it was not bad to cultivate it in actual combat. It was also the method that benefited him the most. Instantly, the breath of will rapidly spread out and filled his limbs and bones. He immediately felt that because of the will, the toughness of his body had increased slightly. If he could already achieve this at the beginning of his cultivation, how powerful would he be if he could cultivate it to the peak? Moreover, he was only at the beginning of cultivating the will, and the enhancement was already so terrifying. A trace of surprise flashed across Shin Zhuang's face, but it soon became fierce. With a low roar, he threw out a punch. Chapter 1704. In the tomb of the god of sin, he had the opportunity to cultivate true intent and increase his strength. If this happened to someone else, he would naturally be able to do the same. Of course, he wasn't the only one who was getting stronger. Others were also constantly getting stronger. Therefore, it would depend on who gained more benefits or who was more powerful. Previously, Shima had thought about it a lot. He felt that he was only one move away, which was why he was defeated by Xiaoyang. However, as long as he was careful and used all his strength, he still had a chance to win. At least, in his opinion, his strength was similar to Xiaoyang's. Therefore, if Yi Shiwen could win in the competition of the realm of the gods, he could do the same. Under the momentum of this charge, the death aura immediately avoided it as if it was greatly threatened. It had no choice but to retreat, not daring to disturb it in the slightest. His fist intent was displayed as if it was unparalleled. It was restrained in his heart and was unparalleled. This was the case for fist techniques. With a punch, heaven and earth would tremble. At this level, one could be considered to have reached the peak. Even though Shinma was still very far away from this level, he already had the heart chi and had even nurtured some divine intent. Therefore, under the bombardment of this punch, it was already very different from before. Instantly, Xiaoyang couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This guy was indeed much stronger than before. From the looks of it, he would have to show some ability in order to defeat him. However, it was still a bit of a stretch to say that now. After the fight, he would know how much stronger he was than before. In the next moment, Xiaoyang also threw out a punch. His punch was casually drawn from the method he had cultivated. In addition, he had also comprehended a bit of divine intent. As a result, although the punch looked ordinary, it was still extraordinarily powerful. Sometimes it looked very simple, but it was very practical. Even though he couldn't display his full strength, it was still extraordinary. Bang! The two fists collided with each other like two mountains. Suddenly, both of them felt a strong, rebounding force and retreated a few steps. At the same time, every step they took could be said to cause the earth to shake and the mountains to shake, leaving behind deep footprints. Moreover, this was under the condition that they were deliberately retracting their strength. If this strength was allowed to erupt, it was likely that the ground under their feet would directly collapse and countless huge ravines would appear. After being repelled, a trace of astonishment flashed through Shinluo's eyes. Xiaoyang's fist technique was not weak either. This really caught everyone off guard. However, both of them knew that Xiaoyang's divine will of the fist technique was still slightly inferior to Dazed. After all, Dazed focused on practicing his fist techniques, so it was normal for him to have a deeper understanding of them. However, the fact that the two of them were able to share the limelight with each other made Shinma feel somewhat uneasy. He had put in a lot of effort. Could it be that he was not worthy of Xiaoyang's efforts? The more he thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. This was really difficult for him to accept. Shinma quickly discarded these thoughts in his heart. After all, his opponent was the champion of the grand competition, so his strength naturally couldn't be underestimated. At the same time, he also rejoiced. If Xiaoyang had the same mentality as him, then he could have returned all the humiliation from before. Therefore, in the next moment, Shinma rushed over again. His fists were like a violent storm as they bombarded him. Xiaoyang took a deep breath when he saw this. He didn't dodge or punch. Instead, he stood there and allowed Shinma to continuously bombard him. When those fists arrived, layers of light screens appeared in front of Xiaoyang. Under the bombardment of those fists, the light screens were like ripples on the surface of the water, spreading out in circles. Punch after punch, Shinma's fists became faster and fiercer. He wanted to see just how many of his fists this technique could block. On the other hand, Xiaoyang was constantly retreating, quietly dispersing the forces that he was unable to neutralize. Therefore, every step he took would cause cracks to appear on the ground. Xiaoyang's previous exchange of fists was because he wanted to see how powerful Shinma's fists were. Now he wanted to test how powerful this true intent manifestation technique was. He wanted to see if it was as described. A single breath of will was enough to put him in an invincible position. Although this was a bit of an exaggeration, it could still be done under certain circumstances. Xin Fian was a little puzzled when she saw that Xiaoyang wasn't retaliating. She didn't think that Xiaoyang was so good-tempered that he would allow himself to be hit. However, wasn't this method a little risky? His opponent was the number one of the new generation of the hidden dragon role in the divine realm. Even if he looked down on him, it shouldn't be to this extent. Fortunately, although their battle was intense, it wasn't too big of a disturbance, so it was barely acceptable. She could only hope that her cousin would stop after venting his anger. At this moment, Shinma didn't think so. The force of his fists became stronger and stronger, and could be said that he didn't show any mercy. Xiaoyang had King Wu's level 8 physique to begin with. In addition, he had the support of the true intent manifestation technique. Therefore, there wasn't much of a problem for him, and he could endure it. Moreover, Xiaoyang was also borrowing Shinma's strength to temper his physique by taking the beating passively. In the true intent manifestation technique, there was a technique like this. One could continuously take a beating and then borrow the convenience of the technique to temper one's body. Of course, the risk of doing so was very high. If he was not careful, the opponent's strength would be too terrifying. Then he would be shattered with a single punch. At that time, he would probably face the end of being beaten to death. Fortunately, although Shinma's strength was tyrannical, Xiaoyang was still able to endure it. Moreover, although there would be a little more strength at times, he could use some mysterious methods to disperse it so that it wouldn't impact his meridians. It could be said that every bit of strength was controlled very well, so there wouldn't be any accidents. This was also because Xiaoyang had a good foundation. If it was an ordinary person who dared to use this technique to temper their cultivation, they would probably be beaten to death because of their overconfidence. Chapter 1705. In that gloomy world, a man in black was frantically throwing punches at his opponent. His actions were swift and merciless. One could even say that he was a little crazy. However, every punch he threw seemed to have no effect. His opponent didn't suffer any injuries. It was like a child playing around. It didn't hurt or itch. Soon, Shinma also discovered the problem. He realized that every punch he threw was like a stone sinking into the sea. It only caused some ripples and didn't even cause a splash. It was very strange. What exactly was going on? In the blink of an eye, he also thought of a possibility. His eyes were filled with shock. Wasn't it a little too arrogant to do this? Of course, there was a world of difference between arrogance and proper control. Arrogance would often cause one to pay a huge price. However, if one controlled it properly, one could obtain some benefits. The difference between the two was very obvious. Perhaps he sensed that something was wrong, so Shinma quickly retreated and stopped attacking. I didn't expect you to actually use my fists to temper your own body and treat me as a whetstone, Shinma said, as if he had been greatly humiliated. The fury in his heart could no longer be suppressed. This fellow's methods were really too much. Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said, I think you're almost done. You've also vented most of the resentment in your heart. If it's not enough, I can let you continue hitting me for a while. I won't retaliate. Xiaoyang was very satisfied with the tempering just now. He even felt a little reluctant. After all, it was very difficult to find a suitable amount of strength. Shinma was just right. He didn't lack any power. Even if he had used a little more, he could use a technique to disperse it and not injure Luo Yunyang. Upon hearing this, Shinma gnashed his teeth in anger. This fellow actually dared to provoke him. This was really repulsive. Although he didn't say it, he could feel the contempt in his voice. Even though Xiaoyang didn't think that way, other people would sometimes think too much. Sometimes, if you said something sincerely, others might think that you were provoking them instead of really wanting to reconcile. Now, Shen Zhuang felt very helpless. He realized that the reason Xiaoyang was able to fight him back then was because of his tyrannical physique. Now, in the Tomb of the God of Sin, he had obtained some kind of technique that made his defensive power even stronger. Even his gilded battle body technique was somewhat overshadowed by it. Strictly speaking, the gilded battle body art was similar to the myriad manifestation true intent art. Moreover, at this stage, the 10,000 elephants' true meaning incantation was slightly weaker. The reason why Xiaoyang could be so relaxed was because he had already made a breakthrough in his cultivation. Moreover, he was King Wu level 8. Under the combination of these two factors, he could be so tyrannical without any flaws. In that case, I'd like to see how powerful your technique is. Shenluo's chest heaved up and down as he spoke. It could be seen that he was indeed very angry now. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was flustered and exasperated. In his opinion, he had suffered too much humiliation today. Furthermore, Xiaoyang thought that he was strong enough to humiliate him like this. This grudge could be considered to have been formed. If Xiaoyang knew about the strange thoughts in Shima's mind, he would definitely be shocked. He might even find it hard to understand what was going on in Shima's mind. A moment later, a strange light suddenly flashed on Shenluo's fist, and a pair of boxing gloves appeared. The boxing gloves looked a little strange because there was a dragon head carved on them. It was very strange. As the gloves continued down, the arms were covered with a dragon's body. The glittering golden things looked like dragon scales. The boxing gloves shone with a strange aura and an imposing aura. It was obviously a sacred weapon. Xiaoyang couldn't help but be stunned when he saw the weapon. This is my wager. It's a low-grade sacred weapon called the Yellow Dragon, Shenluo said coldly. Originally, Shenluo didn't want to use this sacred weapon. However, he had no other choice now. Only by doing so could he break through Xiaoyang's defense and defeat him. Otherwise, if he couldn't even break through his opponent's defense, he wouldn't be a match for him even if he exhausted himself to death. Shenluo's desire to win was very strong and domineering. In his opinion, he had to do this in order to win. After seeing the boxing gloves, Xinfian's expression became much more serious. She naturally knew the origin of the boxing gloves and how powerful they were. That was why she was so worried. Now they had really reached the point where they would fight to the death. She knew her cousin's temperament very well. In the end, Xinfian could only sigh helplessly. She had already made preparations. No matter who lost, she would help them. The sword also quietly appeared in her hand. This was the only way she could feel more at ease and not be at a loss. Xiaoyang looked at the boxing gloves and smiled without saying a word. It was just a sacred weapon. He had a lot of them. Moreover, he didn't plan to use them. After all, he had 2 Kingwu level 8 cultivations. Now that he had gained a lot in the Tomb of the God of Sin, he could give it a try. In the next moment, Shenluo directly punched out. Immediately, the boxing gloves emitted waves of dragon roars, as if a yellow dragon was roaring. It was deafening. The fist will become even more powerful with the support of the sacred grade celestial device. Perhaps it was because he had enough strength, but the divine intent that came out of this punch was worlds apart from the one before. Boom! Xiaoyang still didn't dodge and took the punch head-on. Instantly, his whole body started to stagger backwards, looking extremely miserable. Even the layer of ripples in front of his chest didn't appear again. Instead, it directly shattered. That breath of will couldn't bear the burden and was scattered. It would not be easy to gather another breath in a short period of time after one's spirit was broken. Moreover, it was almost impossible to do so. Xiao Yang's face was a little flushed. Although his breath of will was scattered, he didn't suffer any injuries. At the same time, it could be seen that this technique wasn't bad. If he cultivated it well, there might be many benefits in the future. It wouldn't even matter if he was beaten by an opponent of the same level. Chapter 1706. A smug smile appeared on Shinma's face when he saw his opponent's defensive true intent shatter with a single punch. Now that your defensive technique is no longer invincible, I'll be able to hit you with my fists. At that time, I'll naturally be able to beat you to the ground. As a result, Shinma saw an opportunity for victory. It could be said that it was within reach. As a result, he was extremely excited. How could he obtain victory? All he needed to do was throw punch after punch. No matter how powerful Xiao Yang's body was, he wouldn't be able to withstand it when the time came. With that in mind, Shinma no longer hesitated. With a shout, he leapt up and launched a fierce attack once more. Now that he had the assistance of the yellow dragon, he was much stronger than before. Moreover, he was even more domineering than before. It was as if the world would shatter under his punch. Of course, that was a little exaggerated. However, even a huge mountain would probably be shaken by his punch. That was how powerful strength was. It was incomprehensible and unimaginable. Shinma did not seem to have calmed down when he saw Shinma attack again. Instead, he felt like Shinma was taking advantage of him. Immediately, Xiao Yang lost some of his patience. It seemed that Shinma really didn't know when to stop. He wouldn't stop until he was covered in dirt. Since that was the case, there was no harm in showing him just how much of a difference there had been between them during this period of time. When the punch was about to land, Xiao Yang's body flashed, and he disappeared from where he was standing. Immediately, the domineering fist intent poured down where he had been standing. Dust immediately flew into the air, and the ground caved in. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the power of this punch was. With a single thought, Xiao Yang used the 7 steps of the god of berserkers. When he reappeared, he was already beside Shin Luo. He also threw a punch without holding back. Immediately, golden light flashed and a muffled sound rang out. Although Xiao Yang's body was strong and his strength was extraordinary, he couldn't break through the gilded battle physique's power. As a result, when he saw Shinma's fist sweeping over, he immediately took a second step and quickly put some distance between them. After standing still again, Xiao Yang's mouth revealed a helpless smile. Their defensive technique had reached the point where Shinma couldn't shake it with his own strength. It was indescribable. Therefore, in the next moment, a bolt of lightning flashed in his hand. The silver lightning spear appeared out of thin air. You have a saint-grade magic treasure, but so does Xiao Yang, and he has more than you. Shin Luo stared at Xiao Yang in the distance, and a faint smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. As expected, you can't do anything to me with your own strength. Looking at it this way, Shinma's heart felt a bit better. They were about the same. There wasn't much of a difference between them. Therefore, in the following battle, they would have to rely on magic treasures and martial techniques. Shinma took a deep breath, and his aura instantly condensed. When he opened his eyes again, they were filled with sharpness. His fist intent had become extremely domineering. It was as if his eyes were filled with fist intent. He had gained a lot in the tomb of the god of sin this time, but he still lacked some foundation. However, as the battle progressed, he had also improved quite a bit. Although he hadn't comprehended all the subtleties, he was already strong enough. Mountain-splitting noble energy fist. Shinma let out a low roar. Immediately, all the fist intent in his body gathered together and blasted down with a punch. Countless fist intent poured down like a storm. Xiao Yang stood there and waved the silver spear in his hand. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning let out a dragon's roar and rushed out. Thunder dragon roar of 1,000 poisons. Xiao Yang didn't have much patience now, so he wanted to end the battle quickly. Since Shinma didn't want to continue fighting and wanted to end the battle quickly, there was no need for him to hold back. He had almost achieved his goal, so the next step was to wrap things up. Seeing the lightning dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, Shinma's expression changed slightly. He could sense that the power contained within was indeed extraordinary. However, his fist technique wasn't weak either, so it was still hard to say who would win. Therefore, this time's clash would depend on who had a higher comprehension of the Tao. In the distance, Xin Fian tightly gripped her sword. Her brows were tightly knitted together. She could also feel that the battle between the two of them was about to end, so she was very nervous. She hoped that the two of them would stop before going too far, and stop when it was time. However, that was impossible, so she was ready to end the battle. Xin Fian had comprehended some opportunities that belonged to her in the previous ancient tomb, so her strength had increased tremendously. She was very confident that even though she wasn't a match for the two of them, it wouldn't be a problem for her to stop them when she was weak. Countless fist wills and lightning dragons collided with each other at this moment. For a moment, the roaring sound was endless. It was extremely intense as it continued to explode. Shinma also made his move at this moment. The gloves on his hand shone brightly again. Clearly, he was ready to follow up with another attack. Xiao Yang didn't hold back either. He kept using the 7 steps of the barbarian god to change his position, making it difficult for Shinma to figure out and target him. In the next moment, Shinma suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He turned around and punched out. Xiao Yang took the last step and landed behind him. Moreover, the silver spear in his hand was directly thrust out without any hesitation or mercy. Everything seemed so calm, yet it was filled with killing intent. Chi. In the end, Dazed was still a bit too slow. The silver spear pierced his chest first. His body trembled, and the fist that he had swung out lost its momentum and was left unfinished. Boom! Countless fist intents were now, like raindrops, constantly smashing onto Xiao Yang's back. Suddenly, he couldn't withstand the force and was pushed a few steps forward. In the next moment, the lightning dragons also directly penetrated Shinma's body and weaved in and out. Xin Fian stood to the side. Her grip on her sword tightened. At the same time, her heart ached. Why did the two of them have to do this? What was the point of fighting like this? It was just a dispute of personal feelings. Why did they have to do this? Xiao Yang's hand trembled, and he pulled out his silver spear. He took a few steps back and put some distance between them. Chapter 1707. As the smoke dissipated, the gloomy world regained its tranquility. However, there were countless cracks and holes on the ground. The two men, one in white and one in black, stood facing each other without any movement. Neither of them continued to attack. It was as if they were fighting with their eyes. The woman in white, standing in the distance, heaved a sigh of relief. In her opinion, it was best for the fight to end like this. After all, if they continued to fight, it would eventually evolve into a battle of life and death. By then, there would be no possibility of reconciliation between them. Fortunately, their emotions seemed to be very stable and did not explode. That was still considered good. As long as he could think clearly in his heart, then all the problems would be easily solved. At the same time, Shen Fian's gaze towards Xiao Yang changed again. How did he cultivate? How did his strength increase so much in such a short period of time? Suddenly, she felt that cousin Wu Shuang's big mouth was real, and he was not talking nonsense. Xiao Yang stood there. He felt a burning pain on his back. Even his bones were cracked. His opponent's mountain-splitting noble energy fist was indeed much stronger than before. This was really unexpected. Fortunately, Xiao Yang's physique was King Wu's level 8. Otherwise, if he really took this punch, all the bones in his back would be broken and he would be seriously injured. It had to be said that Shinma was indeed very talented. His fists were even more tyrannical. It was a pity that he was born at the wrong time. He met someone who was almost invincible in the same realm. Shinluo's current situation was very bad. Even though he had the gilded battle body scripture, which also offset a lot of the power, the spear had directly pierced his chest. Coupled with the rampaging lightning dragon, he was extremely depressed and seriously injured. At least compared to Xiaoyang, his injuries were much more serious. His black clothes were soaked with his own blood. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Dazed had lost by one move. Even if they continued fighting, the result would still be the same. He also felt this, so his heart was also very painful. Originally, he was full of confidence. He thought that he could turn the tables this time and return all the humiliation he had suffered. But who would have thought that he would still fail in the end, and the humiliation in his heart grew even more. This could be said to be a very big blow, causing him to be in so much pain that he wished he was dead. His supreme pride had been completely smashed into smithereens, and his heart was filled with an unpleasant feeling. That feeling was as if he had been beaten down into the mortal world. He felt that he was worthless like trash. Right now, his mood could be said to be extremely low. He had never thought that he would not be able to compare to the two people in the clan. Now, even an outsider could defeat him. For a moment, the frustration that had been concealed in his heart seemed to have completely exploded at this moment, causing him unbearable pain. Why did things turn out this way? He was a proud son of the heavens, and he had worked hard to cultivate without slacking off. In the end, he had obtained everyone's recognition and successfully ranked first on the Hidden Dragon list. But now, there was an endless stream of people who were more outstanding than him. This sense of loss could be said to be enormous. So Dazed was unwilling to accept it. He felt that he should be the strongest one, and his position should be unshakable. However, the changes in the situation had far exceeded his expectations. Why was this happening? He was unwilling to accept it. Xiaoyang stood there, and his expression quickly returned to normal. He smiled bitterly and helplessly when he saw the changes in Shima's expression. Sometimes it was very difficult to help a person who had walked into a dead end. He could only rely on himself to take a step back and take a step back in his state of mind in order to let go. Otherwise, he would really be stubborn to the end. Moreover, Xiaoyang and Dazed were rivals. Therefore, his persuasion was meaningless, and it might even backfire and cause endless trouble. He felt very helpless now. It was really difficult to decide how to deal with this. Xinfian was also speechless. She knew very well that her cousin wasn't someone who would admit defeat so easily. He might even go to some extremes because of this. That was hard to say. Therefore, she was very worried now. At the same time, she didn't know what to do to prevent her cousin's state of mind from collapsing. For a moment, the atmosphere became a little strange. It was as if a trace of indescribable emotion was constantly venting. How could I have lost? This thought kept echoing in Dazed's mind. He couldn't figure out why things had turned out this way. Why was the gap between him and Xiaoyang so huge? This was really illogical. It was completely impossible. It seemed that as his pride was shattered, Dazed also felt that his Dao heart was on the verge of collapsing. It was as if his cultivation and achievements were a complete joke. Suddenly, Dazed recalled how he had heard someone comparing him to Xiaoyang when he walked out gloomily after the grand competition. He had said that he was worthless and that he was just bragging about his strength. It wasn't worth mentioning. Dazed flew into a rage when he heard that. However, he didn't make things difficult for that person. Instead, he worked even harder in his cultivation. He knew that his enemy was Xiaoyang and not that talkative person. He knew the reason behind it. He worked even harder in order to defeat Xiaoyang. However, after exchanging blows, he realized that the gap between their cultivation levels was getting bigger. This was unacceptable to Dazed. He suddenly raised his head and shouted as if he was venting his dissatisfaction. He was very unhappy. Xiaoyang sighed helplessly when he saw Dazed's almost crazy appearance. If a person's expectations of himself were too high and too strict, once a mistake was made, a huge flaw would appear in his state of mind. That was the case for Dazed. His cultivation journey could be said to be smooth sailing. However, now that he had suffered consecutive setbacks at the hands of another person, he couldn't take it anymore. Shen Fian was even more heartbroken when she saw this. Although she had already expected this, she didn't expect him to collapse to this extent. Why? Dazed seemed to be questioning the heavens. Chapter 1708. This was also the source of Shinma's frustration. He couldn't accept such an outcome. He didn't understand. He had put in a lot of effort, and his aptitude was top-notch. Why did he encounter a bumpkin from the outside world who had no background and was in a place where the spiritual energy was thin? However, Yi Shiwen was stronger than him. Xiaoyang was inferior to Shinma in terms of cultivation environment and technique, which was why he was defeated. Therefore, Shinma couldn't accept it. He didn't understand why. He couldn't accept it. As long as he was a little stronger, he could defeat Xiaoyang. His pride could continue, and his Tao heart that was about to shatter would also recover. With this thought in mind, a glimmer of brilliance appeared in Shinma's eyes. However, this glimmer of brilliance was very strange and crazy. Shinma laughed loudly as if he had completely gone mad. It was as if he had gained something and comprehended something, so he was very happy. More importantly, he felt that as long as he took this step, he would definitely win. Suddenly, countless forces rushed into Shinma's body. However, there was no spiritual energy here. There was only endless death energy. When he saw this scene, Xiaoyang's expression revealed a trace of shock. Wasn't this a little too crazy? Wasn't this a little too risky? No. Shen Fian suddenly shouted. Her voice also became a little sorrowful. Shen Fian didn't expect that pride could really make a person go astray. He didn't even care about the price. This method was indeed very good now, but it had to be considered. This was the divine tomb where death energy lingered. Doing this was pushing oneself into the abyss. Previously, Xiaoyang said that Shinma was a little agitated because he was invaded by death energy. However, she didn't expect him to take the initiative to gather. She really didn't know what to do. Stop! Shen Fian roared. She rushed forward to stop Shen Luo. Now, Shinma felt that the only way he could defeat Xiaoyang was to break through to the next realm. Only in this way would he have a chance to defeat Xiaoyang, and it would be a one-sided victory. This way, the resentment in his heart could be completely eliminated. This was the result he wanted. As long as he could take his revenge, was it important where he was? Scram! Seeing Shen Fian flying over, Shin Mao let out a low roar and waved his sleeve, sending her flying. Shen Fian took a few steps back before she could stabilize herself. She had a complicated look in her eyes. She knew that if she continued to stop them, it was possible that the two of them would become enemies. Shin Luo's ego was very high, and he couldn't take the slightest provocation. It could even be said that he had lost his rationality and was unable to differentiate between good and bad. It could be said that before entering the divine tomb, Shinmo had already touched the threshold of the 9th step. After entering the divine tomb, he gained a lot of enlightenment, so breaking through was only a matter of a thought. He had been suppressing it before, but now he had lost his mind, so he didn't have the slightest scruple. Shin Luo was already possessed by the devil. He only had one thought now, and that was to defeat the opponent in front of him. His obsession was deep, and it could be said that it was difficult to change. Shen Fian was also heartbroken. The situation had developed to this point, and she felt somewhat powerless. However, she felt that she had to stop it. Otherwise, if Shen Luo really broke through, his cultivation might really reach the end. Not to mention that he would fall into a bottomless abyss. Even if he got out, he wouldn't be able to make any progress. The death aura would fill his cultivation path with layers of obstacles, and it would be difficult to break through. Suddenly, the sword in Shen Fian's hand let out a long whistle. Even if she wasn't a match for him, she had to do her best to stop it and prevent a worse outcome from happening. What? Are you still going to attack me? Shen Fian, It's a good thing that I'm breaking through. Are you going to stop it? Or are you afraid that I'll hurt your sweetheart after breaking through? As expected, a girl's appearance isn't even married yet, but you're already thinking for others? Shinluo's face twisted when he saw this, and he questioned. Faced with such a question, Shen Fian's determination, which she had made with great difficulty, began to waver. Although these words were somewhat inexplicable, she knew that if others were disturbed while breaking through, they would also suffer from qi deviation. Now, it could be said that she couldn't advance or retreat. Suddenly, the lady in white looked at Xiaoyang as though she had seen a life-saving straw. He could definitely do it. Along the way, Xiaoyang had dealt with a lot of things. He had even been able to save Ji Fei, who had been completely invaded by the death aura. He could definitely do it. Xiaoyang sighed helplessly when he sensed Lin Fan's gaze. Fate really made fools of people. Shinluo's desire for victory was too strong, which was why he had acted this way. Speaking of which, he was also very helpless. Shinluo, that's enough. Xiaoyang thought for a moment and said, helplessly, if it had been anyone else, Xiaoyang would have killed them directly. However, Shinluo's status was different. Furthermore, Xiaoyang had received a huge gift from the Celestial Emperor, so it was only right for him to take care of him. Shinluo laughed loudly and said, What? Are you afraid? After I break through, I'll make sure you die without a burial place. Now, Shinluo seemed to have completely lost his mind. It was as though everything would go according to his plan without the slightest change. Xiaoyang sneered and said, So what if you've broken through? Do you think you're a match for me? If you're not convinced, then I have an explosive pill here. It can allow you to have a rank 9 cultivation base for an hour. Why don't you give it a try? As soon as he said this, Shinluo frowned slightly. Clearly, he didn't have the slightest doubt. He had heard from unrivaled God that it was indeed so mysterious. Moreover, the God Realm tournament had added a rule that medicinal pills couldn't be used. This was to prevent the explosive pills from being too heaven-defying and violating the fairness of the tournament. Would you be so kind as to help me? I've never seen an explosive pill before. If you give me a poisonous pill, then I wouldn't know either. Shinluo roared angrily. Now his thoughts had completely fallen into a dead end, and he couldn't extricate himself. This was what it meant to measure the heart of a gentleman with one's own yardstick. Xiaoyang shook his head with a smile and said, Do you think that if I really wanted to harm you, I could let you break through steadily? What will you do if I attack you now? Chapter 1709. Hearing this, Xun Jinshin's eyes widened. Indeed, he was now in the midst of breaking through. If Xiaoyang wanted to stop him with all his might, it would be difficult for him to resist. So would he give him a chance? The deathly aura has begun to invade. Shen Fian shouted when she saw the deathly aura surging. She hoped that the person she trusted could help to suppress it. Now that Shen Days was breaking through, it could be said to be a natural phenomenon. The deathly aura gathered together like a vortex, constantly surging toward Shen Days. It was a spectacular sight. Gusts of chilly wind whizzed past, as if countless evil spirits were having a carnival. Xiaoyang, are you so timid? You don't dare to let me break through to rank 9 before we fight to the death? Shindaze stared at his opponent like a ferocious beast. Xiaoyang shrugged and said, I'm not a gentleman, so I don't have to care too much about the rules. Shindaze's expression changed drastically when he heard this. If that was the case, wouldn't he be unable to break through successfully? However, he wouldn't think so much. He just needed to do it. As long as he persevered, he would definitely succeed. It wouldn't be too late to settle the score when the time came. Didn't you show off your sage grade magic treasure to me before? Coincidentally, I also got the prize, and it's better than yours. Xiaoyang said with a smile. He stabbed the silver spear in his hand into the ground, and a strange long sword appeared in his hand. It was the Thunderfire Divine Sword. After the silver lightning spear was stabbed into the ground, the power of lightning gushed out and quickly formed a circle around Shindaze. preventing the deathly aura from entering. However, the vortex was still there, and it was still a problem. Moreover, it couldn't be delayed. If it continued, the deathly aura would enter his body. What are you trying to do? Shindaze was puzzled when he saw this. However, when he saw that the lightning was constantly intertwining, he understood that it was very likely that they were setting up some kind of array formation. Seeing Xiaoyang attack, Shen Fian immediately shut her mouth and looked at Shen Zhuang nervously. She didn't dare to speak too much, afraid that she would disturb Xiaoyang and fail at the last moment. Just looking at the tornado formed by the death qi made his heart ache. Why did he have to take this step? Shen Luo, since you're so stubborn, there's nothing I can do. Seeing that the God realm has given me a lot of benefits, I'll give you a hand today. Xiaoyang said as he gently wiped the sword. Currently, Xin Zhuang's expression was extremely ugly. At the same time, he was extremely furious. Didn't you force me to do this? If it wasn't for you, would I have to do this? What a pretentious crocodile cry. You're really good at talking. No wonder you can deceive those simple-minded people. Xin Luo glanced at Shen Fian as he spoke. His meaning was very obvious. Right now, Shen Luo seemed to have completely turned into a lunatic. No matter how much Shen Fian said, he would probably think that Shen Fian was up to no good and would harm him. Therefore, Xiaoyang wasn't going to say anything more. What he was going to do next was the most important. Go. After Xiaoyang finished wiping the sword, he let out a low roar, and the Thunderfire Divine sword flew out. Instantly, lightning and fire intertwined as it flew out. When the Thunderfire Divine sword flew into the whirlpool, the death aura immediately began to emit flames and lightning, making it look extremely spectacular. Seeing that the death chi whirlpool was about to collapse, Shen Luo immediately panicked and roared angrily, Shen Fian, are you really going to watch an outsider harm me without doing anything? Shen Fian remained silent and observed carefully. She knew that she could only trust Xiaoyang unconditionally now. Otherwise, she would really harm Shen Luo and cause him to fall into the abyss and be unable to extricate himself. The only person who could help him now was Xiaoyang. In an instant, the whirlpool formed by the death qi dispersed with a loud bang. The lightning and fire quickly intertwined like a net, isolating the death qi. The moment the whirlpool disappeared, Shen Luo felt a sense of loss. Without the support of power, how could he break through the next realm? Right now, Shen Luo needed power. Therefore, he didn't care about anything else and directly crashed into the lightning and fire. As long as he could get out, he would be able to obtain power. That kind of thirst was so strong that he was willing to give up his life for it. Now that the incomparably crazy Shen Luo had lost his rationality and was even affected by the death qi, what he was doing now couldn't even be considered an instinct. Shen Fian was heartbroken when she saw this. She didn't expect Shen Luo's obsession to be so deep. Even at this point, he still wasn't willing to give up. Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly when he saw this. He had to admit that Shen Luo's temperament was really stubborn. Being outside was a good thing, but he just didn't know how to choose the right place. Since I'm a good person, I naturally won't give up halfway. Xiaoyang sensed the begging look in Shen Luo's eyes and rushed into the array formation in a flash. Shen Luo was about to use his fists to blast away the lightning and fire when he sensed danger approaching in the next moment. With a dull thud, Xiaoyang's karate chop landed directly on the back of Shen Luo's neck. Shen Luo immediately fainted and fell to the ground as if everything had returned to normal. Of course, a rank 8 powerhouse like King naturally wouldn't be knocked out so easily. Previously, Xiaoyang had already laid the groundwork. The poison had already entered Shen Luo's body along with the lightning dragon. It was just that it hadn't acted up until now. Sometimes if a poison was used properly, it would be beneficial. For example, it could make Shen Luo faint at a critical moment so that he wouldn't cause any more trouble. Shen Fian secretly heaved a sigh of relief when she saw Shen Luo collapse. All of this had finally come to an end, and there was no worse result. This was a good ending. Immediately, Xiao Yang took the silver spear and the thunder fire divine sword back into his hands and put them away with a thought. He looked at the man in black robes and laughed helplessly. He was really an idiot. It was a pity that he had gone astray. Otherwise, his future would have been limitless. As for what would happen to Shinluo in the future, Xiao Yang was concerned about it. After all, everyone had their own fate. Even if he could save Shinluo today, it was hard to say what would happen in the future.